Hey guys, tonight we're stepping aboard a 19th century steamship bound for America, and I hope you're prepared for a week of questionable food, impossible sleeping arrangements, and the constant bone-rattling thunder of a coal-fired engine that never, ever stops. Picture yourself on a Liverpool dock in 1875, surrounded by the acrid tang of industrial smoke, the sharp cry of gulls wheeling overhead, and the desperate chaos of thousands trying to leave the old world behind. The Atlantic stretches ahead, 3,000 miles of grey, merciless ocean, and your floating iron coffin is going to take 7 full days to cross it. Assuming the boilers don't explode and the storms don't flip you sideways, you probably won't get more than 4 hours of uninterrupted sleep the entire voyage. But honestly, that's why you're here, right? So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. I love seeing the global mix of night owls and insomniacs in this community. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Liverpool's Prince's Landing stage stretches before you like a massive wooden tongue, reaching into the River Mersey, and it's utter pandemonium. You're clutching your ticket, third-class passage, £18 sterling that represents 6 months of scrimped wages, and trying not to lose sight of your trunk in the churning sea of humanity. Porters with leather straps across their foreheads haul impossible loads up narrow gangplanks, shouting in thick Scouse accents that you can barely understand. Coal smoke hangs over everything, a gritty curtain that stings your eyes and coats your tongue with the taste of industry. The SS Britannia towers above the dock, and honestly, calling it a ship feels inadequate. It's a floating city of riveted iron plates, 400 feet of industrial might with a single black smokestack belching dark clouds into the already grey March sky. The paddle wheels on either side look like enormous wooden flowers, each slat dripping with river water. Twin masts rise from the deck, vestigial reminders that this vessel can still hoist sails if the engines fail, though everyone pretends that's impossible. Historians still argue whether these transitional steamships were safer than the pure sailing vessels they replaced, but standing here watching black smoke pour from the funnel, you're not exactly filled with confidence. Around you, the dockside is pure theatre. A family of 5, mother, father, 3 children under 8, clings together near the bollards, the grandmother weeping openly as she presses a cloth-wrapped package into the mother's hands. You catch the word Dublin and realise they're Irish, fleeing the lingering aftermath of the famine years, heading toward American promises of land and work. The father's face is stone, but his hand trembles as he guides his smallest daughter toward the gangplank. Nobody does tearful goodbyes quite like the Victorian British Isles. It's almost a competitive sport. To your left, a businessman in a tailored frock coat directs servants who carry leather cases embossed with gold initials. First-class passenger, obviously, heading up the forward gangplank where a uniformed steward checks tickets with exaggerated politeness. That's not your entrance. Your gangplank is aft, near the cargo holds, where the smell of tar and fish oil mingles with coal smoke to create an aroma that would probably violate several modern air quality standards. Keep moving! Keep moving! A ship's officer waves passengers forward, his voice hoarse from shouting. Steamship departs with the tide. Won't wait for dawdlers. You shuffle forward, gripping your trunk's rope handle. The gangplank flexes underfoot, just a reinforced wooden plank with rope railings, and below you the Mersey's brown water sloshes against the ship's hull with sounds that are definitely not reassuring. One slip here and you're taking an unplanned swim in Victorian industrial runoff, which might actually kill you faster than drowning. Fun fact, Liverpool's river was so polluted by the 1870s that locals joked it could be walked across, though nobody was brave enough to test that theory. The deck, when you finally reach it, is controlled chaos. Sailors in canvas trousers and striped shirts coil massive ropes with practiced efficiency, their bare feet somehow immune to the splinters that would cripple normal humans. A second officer marks something in a ledger, counting passengers like inventory. Somewhere below you hear the rhythmic clang of metal on metal, stokers feeding the boilers that will power this beast across the Atlantic. A quirky detail that doesn't make it into most history books. Passenger steamships in the 1870s often carried livestock in deck pens for fresh meat during the voyage. As you're herded toward the companionway entrance, you spot 3 resigned-looking pigs in a wooden enclosure, probably contemplating their rapidly shortening futures. At least someone's sleeping arrangements are worse than yours will be. Third-class passengers follow the steward below. A young man in a stained vest gestures toward a narrow stairway. They call it a companionway at sea, apparently, that descends into the ship's dim interior. The opening looks barely wide enough for your shoulders, and you're not a particularly large person. You take one last look at Liverpool's crowded waterfront, the warehouses stacked with goods from every corner of the British Empire, the church spires rising through the industrial haze, the dirty but familiar England you might never see again. Then you duck your head and descend into the SS Britannia's iron belly, your trunk bumping each step behind you, the sound echoing in the narrow shaft like a countdown. The week ahead stretches out like a sentence, and there's no parole for good behaviour. The companionway spits you out into what the shipping company generously calls passenger accommodation, but which more accurately resembles a floating prison designed by someone who actively hated comfort. The steerage deck, third-class territory, is a low-ceilinged cavern of iron ribs and wooden bunks stacked 3 high, stretching the width of the ship. Oil lamps swing gently from hooks, casting shadows that make the space feel even more confined than it actually is. The air down here is already thick with the smell of unwashed bodies, damp wool, and something vaguely reminiscent of boiled cabbage, though you haven't seen any food yet. Welcome home for the next 7 days. Your bunk is basically a wooden shelf with a thin straw mattress, located in the middle tier of a 3-stack arrangement. The family who boarded just before you, those Irish emigrants you saw on the dock, have claimed the berths to your right, and to your left, a middle-aged German man is already arranging his few possessions with meticulous precision. He nods at you but doesn't speak. The man above you, judging by the boots dangling over the edge, appears to be a labourer with feet roughly the size of dinner plates. You really hope he's a sound sleeper. Privacy is a quaint concept that died the moment you stepped aboard. A canvas curtain can be drawn across the bunk opening, technically giving you a private sleeping space. But these curtains are about as soundproof as tissue paper and offer roughly the same visual security. You can already hear a baby crying 3 rows over, someone coughing with alarming wetness, and what sounds like a couple arguing in Polish or possibly Russian. The United Nations has nothing on a 19th century steerage deck for linguistic diversity. You shove your trunk under the bunk. There's precisely 6 inches of clearance, so you have to angle it diagonally and test the mattress. It compresses to about 1 inch thick, meaning you'll essentially be sleeping on bare wood with a decorative layer of straw between you and spinal damage. The blanket provided is wool, grey and scratchy enough to function as an exfoliation treatment. One pillow, lumpy with what you desperately hope is horsehair and not something still alive. This is luxury travel, 1875 style. The Irish mother is trying to settle her 3 children into 2 bunks, which is some advanced spatial mathematics. The youngest, maybe 4 years old, keeps asking, "When do we see America?" in a voice that could cut glass. The father murmurs something in Irish, Gaelic probably, and you catch the word maiden, which you think means morning. Spoiler alert, the child will ask this question approximately 400 more times over the next week, and the answer will always be, not yet. Around 7 o'clock, you're guessing since your pocket watch is buried in the trunk. A ship's bell clangs somewhere above, and the entire vessel shudders. Not dramatically, just a subtle vibration that runs through the iron hull like the ship is clearing its throat. Then comes the sound that will define your entire week, the engines starting up. It begins as a low rumble, almost subsonic, that you feel in your chest cavity before you hear it. Then the rhythm establishes itself, a steady thump, 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 thump like the heartbeat of some massive iron creature. The paddle wheels begin their rotation, and the whole ship trembles with mechanical life. Here's a fun mainstream fact. Steamship engines in the 1870s typically produced between 500 and 3,000 horsepower, depending on the vessel size. The SS Britannia's engine is probably somewhere in the middle range, which means it's consuming roughly 4 tons of coal every 24 hours. Those stokers you heard earlier, they're going to be shoveling non-stop in shifts for 7 straight days, and you thought your job was bad. The vibration is impossible to ignore. It travels through the iron hull, up the wooden bunk frame, through the pathetic mattress, and directly into your skeleton. Your teeth are literally chattering and you haven't even tried to sleep yet. The German man to your left has stuffed rags into his ears and wrapped a scarf around his head like he's preparing for surgery. He catches you watching and shouts, because you have to shout now over the engine noise. Third crossing, you learn tricks. Any tricks for the shaking? You yell back. He shrugs magnificently. Get used to it. Fantastic advice. The ship begins to move, and you feel the change in motion as the paddle wheels catch the Mersey's current. There's a slight list to starboard, then a correction to port, and your stomach does a little exploratory flip. You're not seasick yet. You're still in the river after all, but your inner ear is definitely filing a formal complaint about this new reality. A quirky historical tidbit that rarely makes it into romantic tales of Atlantic crossings. Third-class passengers were often forbidden from going on deck during certain hours, particularly early morning and evening, to prevent them from bothering first-class passengers. Some ships enforce this with locked companionway gates. You're basically voluntarily entering a floating class-based prison, and the irony of seeking freedom in America while locked below deck is apparently lost on the shipping companies. Night falls. You can tell because someone announces 8 bells, and suddenly everyone's trying to prepare for sleep in a space designed for sardines. The oil lamps get dimmed to save fuel, plunging the steerage deck into a murky twilight, where you can barely see your hand in front of your face. Bodies shift and settle. The baby who was crying earlier has upgraded to full-throated wailing. Someone's snoring already, a rattling sound that competes admirably with the engine. You lie back on your wooden shelf and close your eyes. The bunk is impossibly narrow, maybe 18 inches wide, forcing you to sleep on your back like a corpse or risk rolling onto the floor. The engine's rhythm continues its relentless percussion. Thump, 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 thump. Above you, dinner plate feet shifts position, and the entire bunk structure creaks ominously. Historians still argue whether steamship travel was actually more comfortable than the sailing ships that preceded it, with some pointing to faster crossing times as compensation for the mechanical noise and vibration. Lying here in the dark, listening to a symphony of human misery and industrial thunder, you're pretty sure the historians arguing for more comfortable never actually spent a night in steerage. Sleep, you realise, is going to be a negotiation rather than a certainty. You don't so much wake up as gradually regain consciousness through layers of exhaustion and mechanical noise. The engine never stopped, of course it didn't, and its rhythmic thump 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 has become the baseline soundtrack of your new existence. What finally pulls you from the shallow, restless thing that passed for sleep is a bell clanging somewhere above deck, followed by the shuffle and groan of hundreds of bodies, simultaneously remembering they're trapped on a floating iron box in the middle of the Atlantic approach. Morning light filters weakly through the few portholes at the far end of the steerage deck, creating pale shafts in the gloom that reveal just how many people are crammed down here. You count at least 60 bunks in your immediate section, which means roughly 150 souls sharing this particular circle of hell. The air's ripened overnight, a heady mixture of sweat, coal smoke that somehow seeped through every crack, and the unmistakable tang of chamber pots that needed emptying about 4 hours ago. Breathing through your mouth seems like the wisest strategy. Your back feels like someone spent the night beating it with a wooden plank, which is essentially accurate. The straw mattress is compressed into a symbolic gesture, and you're fairly certain there's a new permanent curve to your spine that wasn't there yesterday. The Irish children are already awake, probably never slept, and the youngest is asking with admirable consistency, "Is it America yet?" The answer remains no, and will continue to be no for another 6.5 days, but nobody has the heart to explain ocean distances to a 4-year-old. Around you, passengers begin their morning transformations from sleeping lumps to upright humans. The German man to your left emerges from his bunk, already somehow looking neat, his shirt buttoned to the collar, his beard combed. You're not sure how he managed this in the dark, but Germans are apparently capable of precision grooming under any circumstances. Above you, dinner plate feet swings down with alarming agility, revealing himself to be a Swedish farm worker who nods politely and says something that might be good morning, or might be a traditional curse. Your linguistic skills don't extend to Scandinavian languages before coffee. The scramble for the washroom, calling it that is generous, begins immediately. At the far end of steerage, there's a communal area with tin basins, a few cracked mirrors, and water barrels that supposedly contain fresh water, though fresh is doing heavy lifting in that sentence. You join the queue, which moves with the efficiency of molasses in January, and eventually reach a basin that 3 people have already used. The water is cold, grey, and has floating bits you don't examine too closely. You splash your face, which accomplishes roughly nothing in terms of actually cleaning, but at least feels like you're maintaining some connection to civilization. Here's a mainstream historical fact that makes your current situation feel even less appealing. In the 1870s, steamships typically allocated about 1 gallon of fresh water per passenger per day for all washing needs. 1 gallon. That's for your face, hands, body, and laundry. The crew, incidentally, got even less. The ship's desalination methods were primitive at best, and most drinking water was stored in wooden casks that gradually developed their own unique flavours, usually a delightful combination of algae and oak tannins. Delicious. A steward appears at the companionway entrance, different from last night's fellow, this one younger, and looking like he hasn't slept either, and shouts, "Breakfast in the saloon, single file, keep moving." The breakfast saloon, you'll quickly learn, is just another section of the steerage deck with slightly better lighting and long wooden tables bolted to the floor. You shuffle along with the herd, your stomach making its own opinions known about food. The dining area is already crowded, passengers claiming spots on the benches with the territorial aggression of seabirds fighting over fish scraps. The tables are bare wood, worn smooth by countless elbows, with tin plates and cups already laid out. A quirky detail that rarely makes it into romantic steamship accounts. These tin plates and cups were often stamped with the shipping company's logo and room number, not for branding purposes, but to prevent theft. Apparently passengers stealing cutlery was enough of a problem that inventory control measures were necessary. The food arrives in large tin containers carried by 2 exhausted-looking stewards who clearly drew the short straw for breakfast duty. Porridge. Grey, lumpy, lukewarm porridge that has the consistency of library paste and roughly the same appetite appeal. A ladle plops a serving onto your plate. It doesn't so much land as it slumps, and you're also provided with a chunk of dark bread that could double as a weapon and a cup of what's optimistically called tea, but which tastes like someone once showed a tea leaf to hot water from across the room, the Irish father across from. He bows his head briefly before eating, murmuring a blessing in Gaelic. His children attack their porridge with the enthusiasm only childhood hunger can produce, apparently unbothered by the fact that the stuff looks like it could be used to repair the hull. The mother eats mechanically, her eyes distant, probably calculating and recalculating the cost of everything against wages that don't exist yet. You take a tentative spoonful. The porridge tastes like sadness mixed with oats, with possibly a hint of salt if you use your imagination aggressively. But it's hot, relatively, and it's food, and you paid £18 for this experience, so you're going to eat it with as much dignity as you can muster. Around you, the dining saloon fills with the sounds of spoons scraping tin plates, quiet conversations in a dozen languages, and the ever-present mechanical heartbeat of the engine below. Above deck, you hear sailors shouting and the slap of water against the hull. The ship is properly at sea now. The Irish coast is probably visible to starboard, the last glimpse of Europe before the open Atlantic. But you're down here with your lumpy porridge, your tin cup of disappointment, and 150 new closest friends. A steward moves through the saloon, collecting empty plates with efficient brusqueness. "On deck for morning constitutional," he announces. 1 hour, then back below. Historians still argue whether the daily schedule on passenger steamships was designed for passenger health or crew convenience, but the consensus leans heavily toward the latter. Still, an hour above deck sounds like paradise compared to the steerage cave, even if it means dodging sailors and probably getting splashed by sea spray. You finish your porridge, drain your terrible tea, and prepare to see daylight. The companionway deposits you onto the main deck, and your eyes immediately protest against actual sunlight. After the dim steerage cave, even the overcast March morning feels aggressively bright. You blink, squint, and gradually adjust to discover that the SS Britannia looks significantly different from above than it did from the dock. For one thing, Liverpool has vanished. In every direction, water. Grey, rolling, endless water that meets grey sky at a horizon line you could probably navigate by if you had any idea how nautical things worked. The immensity of the Atlantic hits you like a physical weight. You're in the middle of absolutely nothing, supported by iron plates and Victorian engineering optimism. The deck is alive with activity. Sailors coil ropes, swab planks, climb rigging that leads to those vestigial masts, and generally perform the mysterious tasks that keep ships functional. Most ignore the emerging passengers completely, your cargo that walks essentially, but one older sailor with a magnificent white beard catches your eye and offers a toothless grin that might be friendly or might be ominous. Hard to tell. The promenade deck, where first-class passengers stroll in dignified exercise, stretches along the starboard side elevated above where you're standing. You can see them up there. Gentlemen in top hats taking measured walks, ladies in elaborate dresses that seem wildly impractical for sea travel, a child being scolded for running. They're about 30 feet away but might as well be on a different planet. A rope barrier with a small sign reading "First Class Only" makes the division absolutely clear. Democracy is a beautiful concept, but not on steamships. You decide to explore. The ship is 400 feet long, roughly the length of a city block, which sounds spacious until you realise that 70% of that is machinery, cargo holds, crew quarters, and first-class amenities. Your available territory is significantly smaller. Still, you're curious about this floating world, so you start walking aft, past coiled ropes that smell like tar, past ventilation grates that exhale warm, coal-tinged air from the boiler rooms below, past the cargo winches that loaded your trunk yesterday. The stern area opens to a small deck space where third-class passengers can stand without getting in the crew's way. It's not large, maybe 30 feet by 20, but it offers an unobstructed view of the ship's wake churning white behind the paddle wheels. The mechanical splash and thump of those wheels is mesmerizing, massive wooden slats hitting water in rhythmic sequence, propelling this iron behemoth forward at maybe 10 knots. Here's your mainstream historical fact. The SS Britannia's paddle wheels are approximately 28 feet in diameter, each one powered by a connecting rod from the central steam engine. They're essentially giant water-beating machines, and they're ridiculously inefficient compared to screw, propellers, but tradition dies hard in maritime engineering. A middle-aged woman stands at the rail, her shawl whipping in the wind, staring at the wake like it holds answers to questions she hasn't asked yet. You recognize her from breakfast, the one who prayed over her porridge in what sounded like Italian. She doesn't acknowledge your presence, lost in her own thoughts about whatever she's leaving behind or heading toward. The wake stretches behind the ship like a scar on the ocean's surface, temporary evidence of your passage that disappears within minutes. You continue your exploration, heading forward along the port side. Here you discover a small deckhouse structure that houses what passes for public facilities. A smoking room for male passengers and a ladies' lounge separated by a thin wooden wall. The smoking room, when you peek inside, is about 12 feet square with wooden benches along the walls and a single porthole providing ventilation. 2 men are already in there, pipes clamped between teeth, creating a fog that would make London jealous. One glances up at your entrance, evaluates you in about half a second, and returns to his private misery. No welcome committee here. The ladies' lounge is theoretically off-limits to you, but through the partially open door you glimpse a similarly cramped space, with slightly more decorative touches. A faded tapestry on one wall, a cracked mirror, a few cushions on the benches that have seen better decades. A woman inside is crying quietly while her companion pats her shoulder with mechanical efficiency. You move on quickly, feeling like you've witnessed something private. Forward of the deck houses you encounter the real barrier, a metal gate with a uniformed officer standing guard. Beyond this point, first-class territory begins. Through the gate you can see a completely different ship. Polished brass fittings, painted woodwork, actual carpet visible through open doorways. A quirky historical detail that sounds made up but isn't. Some first-class sections of 1870s steamships featured potted palm trees secured in special holders, bringing a touch of exotic luxury to the Atlantic crossing. You don't see any palms from here, but you wouldn't be surprised. Third-class passengers remain aft of the midships line, the officer states flatly without looking directly at you. He's probably said this sentence 400 times already today. Just curious about the ship's layout, you offer. Remain aft, he repeats, with the emotional range of a brick. You retreat, chastened. The SS Britannia is simultaneously enormous and impossibly small. Vast when you consider the engineering marvel of moving this much iron across an ocean. Claustrophobically tiny when you realise how limited your actual living space is. You're like a rat in a floating maze, permitted to scurry in designated areas, while the paying rats enjoy cheese in the forward compartments. Historians still argue whether the rigid class segregation on passenger steamships reflected genuine operational needs, Or was simply Victorian social hierarchy exported to sea? But standing here at the rope barrier, the answer feels pretty obvious. Class warfare doesn't stop just because you're surrounded by water. You make your way back to the stern deck, where more third-class passengers have emerged, blinking in the daylight like cave creatures. The Irish children are running in circles, burning off energy that's been compressed by 12 hours below deck. Their father watches with tired eyes while their mother sits on a coiled rope, nursing the baby under a draped shawl. The German man from the bunk next to yours appears at your elbow, somehow materializing without sound. "First time seeing the ship?" he asks. "Is it always this divided?" He laughs, but there's no humour in it. "Mein Freund, everything is divided. On land, at sea, probably in heaven too. God probably has a first-class section. You can't argue with that theology." The hour passes quickly, and then the steward's voice carries across the deck. "Third-class passengers below, clear the deck." Time to return to your wooden shelf. Back below deck, the steerage section has somehow gotten stuffier in just 1 hour. The brief taste of fresh air makes the return feel like descending into a laundry hamper. If the laundry was worn by people who last bathed during the previous decade, you settle onto your bunk, unsure what to do with yourself. There are no books provided, no entertainment, no schedule beyond the meal bells. This is the reality of steamship travel that the glossy advertising posters conveniently omit. Hours and hours of crushing boredom punctuated by mediocre food. The Irish children have been corralled back to their bunks, where the mother attempts to teach them letters using a slate board and a piece of chalk worn down to a nub. The youngest keeps asking about America, shocking absolutely no one, while his older siblings trace shaky letters and occasionally shove each other in the confined space. Their father has disappeared, probably to the smoking room to escape the chaos for a few blessed minutes. You can't blame him. Around 11:30, a different bell chimes, not the same pattern as breakfast, and the now familiar cry of midday meal echoes through the companionway. Lunch, it turns out, is an experience that makes breakfast look like a royal banquet. You shuffle back to the dining saloon, claim the same spot on the bench you had this morning because humans are territorial creatures even in temporary situations, and wait for food to appear. The tin plates return, and this time they're loaded with boiled salt pork, grey slabs of meat that glisten with suspicious moisture, accompanied by ship's biscuit and more of that dark bread that could probably survive a direct cannonball hit. A handful of boiled potatoes rounds out this feast, their skins wrinkled like tiny shrunken heads. The tea makes another appearance, still tasting like disappointment mixed with hot water. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Salt pork was the backbone of maritime provisioning in the 19th century because it could survive for months without refrigeration. Ships carried it in barrels packed with brine, and sailors consumed it at nearly every meal. The salt content was so high that the meat required soaking before cooking to be remotely edible, but on steamships where fresh water was precious, this step often got skipped. What you're eating right now contains enough sodium to mummify a small dog. Enjoy. You saw the meat with your knife. They've provided actual knives today, surprisingly trusting for a crowd of desperate emigrants, and the pork resists with admirable determination. When you finally separate a piece and put it in your mouth, the salt hits your tongue like a physical assault. It's not entirely unpleasant if you ignore your body's immediate distress signals, and it's definitely protein, which your complaining stomach appreciates despite its better judgment. Across from you, the Swedish farm worker is methodically working through his meal with the grim determination of someone who's eaten far worse. He catches you watching and raises his cup in a salute, before draining his tea in one impressive gulp. Either he's lost his sense of taste completely, or he's achieving some kind of spite-driven victory over bad food. Both explanations seem equally plausible. The social dynamics of the dining saloon become more apparent during lunch. The front tables, closest to where the stewards enter with food, have been claimed by what you might generously call the steerage elite. Better-dressed families, people with multiple trunks, a few skilled tradesmen whose calloused hands mark them as carpenters or blacksmiths. They don't interact much with the obviously poor immigrants clustered toward the back. The ones wearing threadbare clothes, carrying everything they own in cloth bundles, speaking languages that even the multilingual chaos of Liverpool probably couldn't identify. A quirky historical tidbit. Some steamship companies in the 1870s actually printed suggested social hierarchies in their third-class passenger guidelines, recommending that respectable artisans and agricultural families of good character avoid excessive familiarity with common labourers and those of uncertain employment. The Victorian obsession with class distinctions was so intense that even among the poor, subdivisions had to be maintained. You're watching that social architecture play out in real time over salt pork and ship's biscuit. To your right, two German families are conversing in rapid dialect, occasionally gesturing at their food with expressions that transcend language barriers. Everyone recognises this is terrible, regardless of vocabulary. Behind them, a Polish couple eats in complete silence, their faces showing that 1,000-yard stare of people who've given up, fighting reality and accepted their fate. The baby that was crying all night is crying again now, its wails competing with the clink of forks on tin plates and the eternal engine throb. You force down the salt pork, nibble the ship's biscuit, which lives up to its nickname of hardtack, by being approximately as edible as ceramic tile, and actually appreciate the potatoes, which are at least recognisable as food. The tea goes down more easily on the second cup, probably because your taste buds have surrendered completely. Midway through the meal, a first-class steward passes through the dining saloon on some errand, his uniform crisp and his nose slightly elevated. He's carrying a covered silver tray, and as he passes, you catch a glimpse of what's underneath: actual roasted chicken, glazed carrots, and what looks like fresh bread rolls. The contrast is so stark it's almost funny. Almost. "They eat like that every day?" the Irish mother asks quietly, having noticed your attention. "I imagine so," you answer. She shakes her head slowly. "And we paid good money for this passage." You don't point out that the first-class passengers probably paid 10 times what she did, because that doesn't make the salt pork any less salty, or the situation any less absurd. Historians still argue whether steamship companies deliberately made third-class conditions miserable to encourage future passengers to pay for better accommodations, or whether they simply didn't care about poor people's comfort. But honestly, both explanations might be true simultaneously. The stewards begin collecting plates before everyone has finished eating, their message clear. Meals are on a schedule, and the schedule doesn't care about your digestion. You drain your second cup of tea, which has somehow gotten worse as it cooled, and prepare to surrender your bench space. "Back to bunks or deck time?" the German man asks. "Deck," you answer immediately. "Always deck when possible." He nods sagely. You learn fast. The dining saloon empties, passengers scattering to their various coping mechanisms, some back to bunks for naps, some to the deck for air, some to the smoking room for pipes and masculine sulking. You head topside, your mouth still burning with salt, your stomach processing food that evolution never prepared humans to handle. At least the ocean air is free. The afternoon stretches ahead like an optical illusion, simultaneously interminable and somehow slipping away minute by minute without anything actually happening. You've been at sea for roughly 24 hours, and you're already intimately familiar with every rivet, rope coil and water stain in your designated areas of the ship. The novelty of being on a steamship crossing the Atlantic has worn off with remarkable speed, replaced by the crushing realization that you have 6 more days of this, and entertainment options are essentially non-existent. The stern deck has become the default gathering place for third-class passengers with nowhere else to be, which is all of them. You lean against the rail, same spot as this morning, because apparently you've already developed territorial habits, and watch the wake churn behind the paddle wheels. It's mesmerizing for about 3 minutes, then it's just water hitting water in the same pattern it's been doing for millions of years. Revolutionary stuff. To your left, the Swedish farm worker has produced a small piece of wood and a pocket knife, and is engaged in what appears to be recreational whittling. He's creating something. Maybe a bird, possibly a fish. The shape is ambiguous, but he seems content, shaving off tiny curls that blow away in the wind. You envy his ability to find satisfaction in such a simple task. Your own hands feel useless, twitching with the need to do something productive that doesn't exist. The Irish father emerges from the companionway with a worn book clutched in his hands. You catch a glimpse of the title, something about agricultural practices, and settles against a coiled rope to read. Within 5 minutes, 2 of his children have found him and are climbing over him like he's a piece of furniture. The reading experiment appears doomed. His wife follows shortly after with the baby, and suddenly their entire family constellation has relocated above deck, because the steerage cave is apparently unbearable even by their impressively high tolerance standards. Here's a mainstream historical fact that perfectly captures your current predicament. The average Atlantic crossing on a steamship in the 1870s took between 7 and 10 days depending on weather and the ship's condition. Sailing ships of the previous era could take anywhere from 3 weeks to 3 months. So yes, you're experiencing the fast option, but when your entire world has shrunk to a 400-foot iron box, 7 days might as well be 7 years. Time dilates at sea in ways Einstein never calculated. A group of young men, maybe late teens or early 20s, has started a card game on an overturned crate. You wander over to watch, grateful for any entertainment that doesn't involve staring at water. They're playing some variation of poker with a deck so worn the suits are barely distinguishable, betting with matches and brass buttons since actual money would be foolish to risk. One player, a lanky Scottish kid with flaming red hair, is either extremely lucky or extremely good at cheating. You're not sure which, but his pile of matches grows steadily while his companions grumble in multiple languages. "Want in?" the Scottish kid asks, noticing your attention. "Don't know the rules," you admit. "Nobody does," he grins. "That's the beauty of it. We're making it up as we go." You decline anyway, not because you're particularly rule-conscious, but because you're trying to conserve your resources, and matches might be more valuable than entertainment as the week progresses. Also, the Scottish kid has the predatory gleam of someone who makes his living off suckers, and you'd rather not be today's mark. The German man from your bunk area has found a different form of entertainment: conversation. He's engaged in an animated discussion with an Italian family, none of them speaking the same language but somehow communicating through aggressive hand gestures and the occasional shared word that exists in both languages. You catch fragments. America, work, Pittsburgh, steel. They're trading information and rumours about American employment, piecing together a fantasy of their future from second-hand accounts and wishful thinking. It's equal parts inspiring and heartbreaking. A quirky historical detail that rarely appears in respectable maritime histories. Gambling among third-class passengers was technically forbidden on most steamship lines, but enforcement was essentially non-existent. Ship's officers had more important things to worry about than whether poor people were wagering buttons over card games. Some ships even had unofficial gambling corners that everyone knew about, but nobody acknowledged. The Scottish kid's poker game is part of a grand tradition of maritime rule-bending. You attempt reading, retrieving the single book you brought, a collection of agricultural essays that seemed interesting in Liverpool, but now reads like it was written to induce sleep. After 2 pages, you realise you've absorbed exactly 0 information because your brain refuses to focus. The engine's constant thrum, the deck's gentle pitch and roll, the wind's whistle through the rigging. It all creates a kind of sensory static that makes concentration nearly impossible. You close the book and accept defeat. The afternoon sun, what little filters through the persistent cloud cover, begins its slow descent toward the western horizon. You've done nothing, accomplished nothing, learned nothing, consumed approximately 4 hours of existence, and have absolutely nothing to show for it, except a vague sense of restlessness and the beginning of what might become a deeper existential crisis about the nature of time and purpose. More passengers emerge from below, driven topside by the same desperate need for space and air that motivated you. The stern deck becomes crowded, bodies packed into the limited area like books on a shelf. The smell improves marginally, sea air diluting the human musk, but the noise increases proportionally. Conversations in Polish, German, Italian, Irish, Swedish, Norwegian, and half a dozen other languages create a Babel tower of desperation and hope. Everyone's talking about America, as if saying its name enough times will make the ship move faster. Historians still argue whether the psychological toll of steamship boredom contributed to immigrant adaptation difficulties upon arrival. Some suggest the enforced passivity and sensory deprivation left passengers unprepared for America's aggressive pace. But sitting here watching grown, adults slowly lose their minds from inactivity, you're starting to see their point. A child's ball, just a bundle of rags tied with string, rolls across the deck, chased by the youngest Irish child who's finally stopped asking about America and found a better use for his energy. He kicks it toward his sister, who kicks it back, and soon 3 more children have joined an impromptu soccer game in the narrow space between rope coils and adult legs. The adults tolerate this chaos with varying degrees of patience, mostly because watching children play is at least something happening. The dinner bell, when it finally rings around 5:30, sounds like salvation. Not because you're particularly hungry, the salt pork is still sitting in your stomach like ballast, but because it represents structure, schedule, the passage of time marked by something other than the sun's lazy arc across indifferent sky. You follow the herd back down the companion way, your legs stiff from standing, your eyes tired from staring at nothing, your mind numb from hours of enforced idleness. 6 more days. Just 6 more days. Dinner, it turns out, is the social event of the day in steerage, not because the food improves, but because evening brings out humanity's desperate need to pretend civilization still exists. The dining saloon fills with passengers who've made visible efforts at respectability. Women have pinned up stray hair, men have buttoned their vests, children have been threatened into temporary submission. Everyone's performing a little theatre of normalcy, as if eating boiled cabbage and questionable meat with proper posture somehow maintains a connection to the lives they left behind. You claim your usual spot, third bench from the front right side, and notice that the seating arrangement has solidified into unofficial territories after just 2 meals. The artisan families up front, the struggling immigrants in back, everyone else sorted by some invisible algorithm of perceived social worth. The German man slides onto the bench beside you with a nod that's becoming familiar. Across the table, the Irish family has achieved the minor miracle of getting all 3 children seated and temporarily quiet. The tin plates return, and tonight's offering is boiled salt cod with cabbage, more of that dark bread and, surprise twist, actual butter. Not much, maybe a tablespoon's worth scraped across the bread's surface. But it's the first fat you've seen besides whatever grease clings to the salt pork, and your body responds with embarrassing enthusiasm. The cod is predictably oversalted, and has the texture of damp wool, but it's different from yesterday's protein, which counts as variety. Here's your mainstream historical fact about steamship dining. Third-class meal service in the 1870s typically operated on a weekly rotation of the same 7 menus, meaning you'd eat this exact dinner again in 7 days if the crossing took that long. Ships provisioned based on predictable supplies: salt fish, salt pork, cabbage, potatoes, ship's biscuit, with occasional fresh items like the butter appearing when storage conditions allowed. You're eating from a menu that's been refined through decades of maritime cost-cutting efficiency. Lucky you. But dinner isn't really about the food, it's about the gossip. And tonight, the gossip is excellent. 2 benches back, a middle-aged Welsh couple is engaged in a heated, whispered argument that isn't nearly as quiet as they think. You catch fragments. Told you we should have waited until spring. And your brother said the passage would be smooth. Apparently someone made optimistic promises about March Atlantic crossings that are proving spectacularly incorrect. Their neighbours are pretending not to listen while obviously absorbing every word. To your left, 3 young women, Irish sisters, you're guessing from their matching features and coordinated shawls, are engaged in animated discussion about the ship's crew, specifically about which sailors are unmarried. One is definitely interested in a particular deckhand with lovely shoulders, a phrase that gets repeated approximately 6 times with varying emphasis. Her sisters are either encouraging this fantasy or mocking it. The line is unclear. Romance at sea apparently transcends class boundaries, at least in imagination. A quirky historical detail that sounds invented but absolutely isn't. Steamship companies in the 1870s sometimes issued explicit warnings to female passengers about maintaining appropriate distance from crew members, suggesting that shipboard romances were common enough to require official discouragement. Some ships even implemented rules forbidding crew from socializing with passengers during off-duty hours. Whether these rules were enforced or simply provided legal cover when inevitable scandals erupted remains a matter of historical debate, and probably depended heavily on which class the female passenger belonged to. The Swedish whittler is telling a story to a captive audience of 2 Norwegian families, his hands gesturing expansively while holding a fork loaded with cabbage. You don't understand the language, but his animated delivery and the audience's laughter suggest either a very funny anecdote or a very good storyteller. Possibly both. One of the Norwegian women laughs so hard she snorts, then covers her mouth in mortification, which only makes everyone laugh harder. Then, the door at the front of the dining saloon opens and the room's energy shifts immediately. A ship's officer enters, not one of the stewards, but someone with more elaborate brass buttons and an air of actual authority. Behind him, a figure in a dark blue uniform coat with gold epaulettes. The captain. Conversation doesn't stop entirely, but it definitely quiets. Captain appearances in third-class dining areas are apparently noteworthy events. He's a compact man, maybe 50, with impressive mutton chop sideburns and the weathered face of someone who's spent decades squinting at horizons. He surveys the room with the expression of a landowner inspecting tenant housing, not hostile exactly, but definitely evaluating. "Good evening," he announces, his voice carrying the automatic authority of command. "I'm Captain Morrison. I trust you're all settling in well for the crossing." Nobody's settling in well, obviously, but a few passengers murmur polite agreements because disagreeing with the captain seems unwise. The Irish father near you actually stands partially, as if the captain were royalty requiring a display of deference. You resist the urge to roll your eyes, but only barely. "We're making excellent time," Morrison continues. "Weather's been favourable so far. Should maintain schedule barring any unforeseen complications." He pauses, seeming to search for something else to say to this room of people whose names he'll never learn. "Ensure you follow all posted regulations, stay in designated areas, attend meals promptly. Any concerns, report to the duty steward. It's a performance, you realise." He's demonstrating that the captain acknowledges the third-class passengers exist, which is probably the extent of his obligations. Some passengers seem genuinely pleased by this attention. The Welsh couple has stopped arguing to beam at him, while others look unmoved. The Scottish card shark from this afternoon is smirking openly, having apparently seen through the theatrical nature of this appearance. "The crew wishes you all a pleasant voyage," Morrison finishes, which is a polite lie since the crew probably wishes you'd all stay below deck and be invisible. He nods once, turns crisply, and exits with his escorting officer. The whole appearance lasted maybe 90 seconds. The moment the door closes, conversation explodes. Everyone has opinions about the captain's brief visit, what it meant, what it didn't mean, whether excellent time is accurate, whether he seemed trustworthy. The Welsh wife decides this validates her husband's decision to book passage. Such a proper captain, very reassuring, conveniently forgetting her earlier complaints. The Irish sisters immediately pivot to discussing whether the captain is married and how old his children might be, because apparently every male on the ship is potential gossip material. Historians still argue whether captains' visits to third-class dining areas were genuine gestures of egalitarianism or calculated public relations performances, but honestly, does the motivation matter if the effect is the same? The passengers feel acknowledged, the captain fulfills some vague obligation, and everyone continues eating their salt cod. You finish your dinner, the cabbage is actually decent if you ignore its tendency to repeat on you, and drain your tea. The dining saloon is still buzzing with conversation, passengers lingering over empty plates because returning to the bunks means confronting the evening's remaining hours with nothing to fill them. The social theatre of dinner is complete. Time for the next act. After dinner, nobody wants to return to the bunks immediately. The steerage deck suddenly feels even more prison-like when you know it's there waiting, so passengers linger in the companionways, the deck, anywhere that delays the inevitable return to wooden shelves and straw mattresses. But the evening air is getting cold. March Atlantic wind has teeth, and eventually someone makes an executive decision that changes your night considerably. "Entertainment in the forward saloon," a steward announces, appearing at the companionway entrance like a theatrical herald. "Music and performances, all third-class passengers welcome." The forward saloon, it turns out, is a multi-purpose space you haven't seen yet, tucked between steerage bunks and cargo holds. It's marginally larger than the dining area, with the same bolted-down benches arranged in rough rows facing a small cleared space that apparently functions as a stage. Oil lamps hang from hooks, casting dancing shadows that make the iron walls seem almost alive. By the time you arrive, the room is already half full with passengers eager for literally anything that qualifies as entertainment. You find standing room near the back, the benches filled instantly, and settle in to discover what passes for amusement on a Victorian steamship. The answer, it turns out, is amateur hour at the village church, but with more desperate energy. The first performer is a middle-aged German man with a concertina, a small accordion-like instrument that he produces from inside his coat like a magic trick. He launches into what you assume is a traditional folk song, something with a bouncing rhythm that sounds vaguely cheerful despite the minor key. He's actually pretty good. his fingers dancing across the buttons with practiced ease, and the room responds with genuine enthusiasm. Several passengers clap along, and by the second verse, people are humming the melody even though nobody knows the words. Here's your mainstream historical fact about shipboard entertainment. Organised passenger performances were actually encouraged by steamship companies in the 1870s, not out of generosity but because they kept people occupied and reduced complaints about boredom. Some ships even offered small prizes for the best acts, usually nothing more than an extra dessert ration or a bottle of wine, but enough to motivate participation. You're witnessing officially sanctioned distraction disguised as cultural enrichment. The concertina player finishes to enthusiastic applause and takes a dramatic bow that seems practiced. Next up is one of the Norwegian families, the father and two teenage sons, who announce they'll sing a traditional ballad about fishing. The father has a surprisingly beautiful tenor voice that carries over the engine noise, while his sons provide harmony that's slightly off-key but endearing in its earnestness. You don't understand a single word, but the melody is haunting, something about lost boats and cold seas that feels painfully appropriate for your current location. Then things get interesting. A young Irish woman, maybe 20, with dark hair pinned up in a style that's trying very hard to look respectable, steps forward and announces she'll recite poetry. You recognise her as one of the three sisters from dinner who are gossiping about the handsome sailor. She's clearly nervous, her hands twisting in her skirt, but she launches into what sounds like an Irish love poem with surprising passion. Her accent thickens as she performs, rolling the words in ways that make them sound like music, even when the actual meaning escapes you. About halfway through, you notice she's making direct eye contact with someone in the front row. Following her gaze, you spot the object of her attention. A young man, probably mid-20s, wearing slightly better clothes than most steerage passengers, with dark hair and a jawline that probably causes trouble wherever he goes. He's watching her with an intensity that could ignite the ship's coal supply. Oh, this isn't just a poetry recitation, this is a declaration. Everyone in the room except these two idiots can see it, and it's both excruciating and oddly charming. A quirky historical detail that never makes it into romantic steamship novels. Shipboard courtships among third-class passengers were incredibly common, partly because the enforced proximity made avoiding each other impossible, and partly because many passengers were young people travelling alone to start new lives. Some steamship companies actually tracked the number of marriages that resulted from their crossings as informal advertising. Find love and a new country. The SS Britannia is basically a Victorian dating app with worse food and better odds of drowning. The Irish woman finishes her poem, her cheeks flushed, and receives polite applause that feels more like the audience acknowledging the romantic subplot rather than appreciating the verse. She scurries back to her sisters, who immediately surround her with whispered commentary that definitely includes the words bold and possibly shameless. The dark-haired young man is grinning like he's won a prize. Next comes what can only be described as a disaster. A Welshman attempts a comic monologue about a chicken farmer, but his accent is so thick and his delivery so mumbly that maybe 3 people in the room understand him. He soldiers on for an excruciating 5 minutes, reaching his punchline with triumphant energy, and the room responds with confused silence followed by sympathy applause. He doesn't seem to notice that nobody got the joke, taking his bows with the satisfaction of someone who believes he's killed. Confidence, you think, is a hell of a drug. The Swedish whittler produces a harmonica. Apparently everyone brought musical instruments except you, and plays a jaunty tune that gets several children dancing in the small open space. The Irish youngest is back in action, spinning in circles until he crashes into his father's legs. His mother doesn't even try to stop him, recognizing a lost cause when she sees one. Other children join the impromptu dance party, and suddenly the forward saloon has transformed into the world's most depressing folk festival. Then someone suggests charades. This goes about as well as you'd expect in a room where participants speak 12 different languages and share maybe 40 words of common vocabulary. The first person, the German concertina player, acts out fishing by miming casting a line and reeling it in. This takes 7 guesses and multiple wrong answers, including swimming, drowning, and inexplicably washing clothes. When someone finally shouts the correct answer, the room celebrates like a major intellectual achievement has occurred. Throughout all this, you notice the social dynamics shifting. The young Irish poet has somehow manoeuvred closer to dark-haired young man, and they're engaged in conversation that looks intense even from across the room. An older Italian couple who've barely spoken to anyone all day are suddenly chatting with a Polish family, united by their shared confusion at the charades game. The Scottish card shark is teaching several teenagers some kind of hand-clapping game that's probably going to turn into a gambling opportunity by tomorrow. Historians still argue whether these enforced social gatherings on steamships actually built community, or just temporarily masked the isolation and anxiety most passengers felt. But watching this motley collection of strangers trying to entertain each other with harmonicas and bad poetry, you're inclined toward optimism, at least for tonight. The entertainment continues for another hour. More songs, more poetry, someone attempting to juggle using potatoes borrowed from the galley, which ends exactly as you'd expect, before a steward appears to announce that oil lamps need to be conserved and it's time for people to return to bunks. The crowd disperses slowly, reluctant to let the evening end. You notice the Irish poet and dark-haired young man lingering near the doorway, clearly trying to extend their conversation. Her sisters are watching with hawk-like attention, probably calculating whether to intervene or allow this courtship to develop. Victorian propriety is complicated enough on land. At sea, it becomes genuinely absurd. You head back towards steerage, your ears still ringing with off-key singing and the memory of enthusiastic accordion. The evening wasn't exactly Broadway quality, but it was something other than staring at water or lying on a wooden shelf. Small victories. The bunks await, and with them, another night of engine thunder and communal snoring. The steerage deck at night transforms into something almost otherworldly. The oil lamps have been dimmed to their lowest settings. Fuel conservation is apparently more important than passengers being able to see where they're walking, creating a twilight realm of shadows and ambiguous shapes. You navigate back to your bunk by memory and touch, your hand trailing along the iron wall supports, occasionally bumping into other passengers, doing the same cautious shuffle through the gloom. Settling onto your wooden shelf feels simultaneously familiar and wrong after just 2 nights. Your body has already started adapting to the narrow space, learning to sleep on your back with arms crossed over your chest like a vampire in a coffin. It's not comfortable, but comfort isn't really part of the third-class experience. You pull the scratchy wool blanket up to your chin and resign yourself to another night of fragmented sleep punctuated by industrial noise. But night below deck isn't silent, far from it. As your eyes adjust to the darkness and your mind settles, you become acutely aware of the ship's symphony of unsettling sounds. The engine's thump, thump, thump is the bass line, of course, but layered over it is an entire orchestra of creaks, groans, scrapes, and mysterious thumps that seem specifically designed to prevent sleep. The iron hull flexes minutely with each wave, producing high-pitched squeals that sound alarmingly like distress signals. Wooden support beams protest their burden with groans that could be structural failure or could just be normal ship sounds. You have absolutely no way to know which. Above you, dinner plate feet shifts position, and the entire bunk structure creaks ominously. To your right, the Irish baby has started its nightly crying routine right on schedule. To your left, the German man is already snoring with the rhythmic precision of a metronome, apparently able to sleep through anything, including the apocalypse. Further down the deck, someone's coughing with alarming wetness, the kind of lung-rattling hack that makes you wonder about tuberculosis transmission rates in confined spaces. You try not to think about it, and fail completely. Here's your mainstream historical fact that will definitely help you sleep tonight. Steamships in the 1870s had mortality rates during Atlantic crossings of approximately 2 to 3 deaths per 1,000 passengers, primarily from infectious diseases like typhoid, cholera, and pneumonia that spread rapidly in crowded steerage conditions. Ships were required to carry doctors, but one physician for several hundred passengers meant treatment was minimal at best. The bodies were typically buried at sea with brief ceremonies, sweet dreams. Around you, conversations start emerging from the darkness. People whisper to bunkmates, to family members, to themselves. The conversations have a different quality at night, more honest, more frightened, more revealing of the anxieties that daylight helps suppress. You catch fragments in languages you understand and many you don't, but the emotional tone transcends vocabulary. People are scared, homesick, second-guessing every decision that led them to this iron box in the middle of the Atlantic. Then someone, you think it's one of the Norwegian men judging by the accent, starts telling a story. His voice is low, meant only for his immediate neighbours, But in the darkness and relative quiet, sound carries. Other conversations pause, people listen. You can't understand most of the words, but you recognize the cadence. This is a ghost story. Of course it is. What better entertainment on a dark night at sea than tales designed to terrify? The story continues for several minutes, the Norwegian's voice rising and falling dramatically. You catch the word ship multiple times and storm, and what might be death, or possibly debt. Your Norwegian is non-existent. Whatever he's describing, his audience is captivated. Someone gasps at what must be the climax. Children who should be asleep are definitely awake and listening. When he finishes, another voice picks up, this time in German, and suddenly you're witnessing a spontaneous ghost story exchange. The German man to your left has stopped snoring and is contributing what sounds like a tale about a ship that set sail from Hamburg and was never seen again. The audience has grown. You can sense more people sitting up in their bunks drawn to these whispered tales of maritime disaster. A quirky historical detail that's simultaneously fascinating and disturbing. Shipboard superstitions in the 19th century were taken incredibly seriously by both passengers and crew. Bad omens included seeing a shark following the ship, a member of the clergy aboard sailing on a Friday, or anyone whistling on deck, supposedly summoning storms. Some captains refused to sail if more than the acceptable number of black cats were aboard. Historians still argue whether these superstitions reflected genuine religious beliefs or simply provided psychological explanations for random tragedies. But either way, they were powerful forces in maritime culture. The Irish mother across from you joins in, her voice soft but carrying. She tells a story, in English thank God, about a ship that left Cobb Harbour bound for Boston, but encountered a ghost vessel in mid-Atlantic, a sailing ship with tattered sails and no crew visible on deck. The ship circled them 3 times, she says, and then vanished into the fog. The crew on her story's ship all fell ill within a day, and half died before reaching America. Her children are silent, probably terrified. You're a little terrified, and you're a rational adult who doesn't believe in ghost ships. Probably. These stories are all nonsense, someone says loudly from the darkness. Sounds like the Scottish card shark. Superstitious rubbish meant to scare children. You say that now, an Irish voice responds, but wait until we hit a storm, then we'll see how brave you are. Storms are natural weather, not supernatural punishment, the Scotsman counters. The sea doesn't care about your stories. But his scepticism doesn't stop the tales. If anything, it encourages them. The Welsh couple contributes a story about a ship where every lamp mysteriously went out at midnight, plunging the vessel into complete darkness while strange voices sang from beneath the waves. A Polish man describes a crossing where passengers reported seeing faces in the water, dozens of them, pressing against the hull and leaving handprints that couldn't be washed away. You listen to all of this and try to separate superstition from genuine fear. These people are in a genuinely vulnerable position, trapped on a ship crossing an ocean that killed thousands of sailors and passengers every year, unable to control their fate beyond trusting that the captain, crew, and ship are competent. Of course, they tell ghost stories. Stories give shape to formless anxiety. They transform something terrible might happen into narratives with beginnings, middles, and ends. Even bad endings are better than uncertain ones. The ship hits a larger wave, and the entire hull shudders. Several people gasp. Someone mutters what's probably a prayer. The Norwegian storyteller laughs nervously and says something that makes his companions chuckle, breaking the tension slightly. These ships are built strong, the German man to your left says, his voice matter-of-fact. Iron and steel. Very safe. The stories are just stories. Tell that to the SS London, someone responds from the darkness. Went down in the Bay of Biscay. Lost all souls except 19. That was iron and steam too. You definitely didn't need to know that detail, but now you do. The SS London disaster was 1866. You remember reading about it, when a passenger steamship foundered in a storm and sank with massive loss of life. Iron and steam didn't help those passengers. You pull your blanket tighter and try to think about literally anything else. The ghost story session gradually winds down as exhaustion wins over fear. Voices fade. The baby's crying diminishes to whimpers. The snoring symphony begins in earnest. Multiple sources now, creating a cacophony of human sleep sounds that compete with the engine's mechanical rhythm. Someone near the far wall is grinding their teeth. Another passenger talks in their sleep, muttering incomprehensible dream conversations. You lie in your narrow bunk, listening to the ship creak and groan and flex, and wonder if any of those ghost ships in the stories were real. Probably not. Probably just natural phenomena misinterpreted by frightened sailors. Probably. The engine thumps on. The Atlantic rolls beneath the hull. The darkness is complete. Tomorrow will be day 3. Only 5 more after that. You wake to wrongness. Not a sound or a specific sensation, but a fundamental shift in how the ship moves through water. For 2 days, the SS Britannia has maintained a steady roll, gentle swells that rock the hull in predictable rhythm. But now, in the grey pre-dawn darkness, the motion has changed. The ship isn't rolling, it's pitching. The bow rises, hangs suspended for a breathless moment, then drops with a sickening lurch that leaves your stomach somewhere near your throat. Then it repeats, and again, and again. Around you, other passengers are stirring, their sleep broken by the same wrongness that woke you. Someone groans. The Irish baby, who finally achieved sleep around 3 in the morning, resumes crying with renewed vigour. Above deck, you hear shouts from crew members and the heavy thud of running feet. Never a reassuring sound on a ship. The oil lamps, already dim, swing wildly on their hooks, casting chaotic shadows that make the steerage deck look like it's breathing. The German man sits up in his bunk, gripping the wooden frame. Even in the darkness, you can see his expression has changed from his usual calm competence. "We're in for weather," he states flatly. "Bad weather?" you ask, already knowing the answer. "Is there good weather in the Atlantic in March?" He barks a laugh without humour. "Hold on to things. It gets worse before it gets better." He's right. Over the next hour, as grey dawnlight filters weakly through the portholes, the Atlantic transforms from merely unfriendly to actively hostile. The waves grow. You can't see them from below deck, but you can feel their size in how the ship responds. Each swell lifts the bow higher, each drop gets more violent, and the wooden bunks creak with stress they weren't designed to handle continuously. Your trunk, supposedly secured under your bunk, starts sliding with each pitch until you drag it out and wedge it between your feet. The breakfast bell rings, late you notice, and the call for meals comes with an added warning. Watch your step, use handholds. The companionway to the dining saloon has transformed into an obstacle course. You climb out of your bunk and immediately understand why the warning was necessary. The deck isn't level anymore. It's a shifting plane that seems determined to throw you against the iron walls. You grab support beams, door frames, anything bolted down, and make your way forward in a series of lunges that would look comedic if they weren't genuinely dangerous. The dining saloon is maybe half full, which tells you something about how people are feeling. Those who made it here look various shades of green and grey. The Swedish whittler is absent. The Irish poet and her dark-haired young man are missing. Most of the families with small children have stayed in their bunks. You slide onto a bench and immediately grip the table edge as the ship drops into another trough. Your stomach protests loudly. Here's your mainstream historical fact, delivered at the worst possible moment. The North Atlantic in March experiences some of the roughest seas of the year, with average wave heights reaching 15 to 20 feet, and storms capable of producing waves exceeding 50 feet. Steamships, despite their engines, could make minimal headway in severe weather, and sometimes had to either ride out storms or attempt to outrun them. The SS Britannia's captain is making calculations right now about whether to maintain course or adjust speed and heading. You're basically in a very slow, very cold roller coaster that you can't exit. Breakfast arrives, and it's immediately clear this is going to be problematic. The porridge is the same grey slop as always, but now the bowls are sliding. A steward places your tin plate on the table, and it immediately begins migrating toward the edge. You catch it, hold it steady, attempt a spoonful. The ship lurches, and half the porridge ends up on your shirt. Around you, similar disasters are unfolding. The Welshman gets a faceful of tea when his cup tips at the critical moment. One of the Norwegian children starts crying when his entire breakfast ends up on the floor, the plate clattering away until it fetches up against the wall. "This is madness," someone mutters in German. "We should wait for calm." But there's no waiting. The schedule must be maintained, storms or no storms. You attempt to eat with one hand while gripping the bench with the other, taking bites during the brief moments when the ship's relatively level. It's like some cruel dining game where the rules keep changing. The porridge tastes even worse than usual, probably because your stomach is already considering a full-scale rebellion. A quirky historical detail that seems almost malicious. Some ships in the 1870s served soup during rough weather, on the theory that liquid meals were easier to keep down than solid food. The practical result was usually hot soup, flying across the dining saloon and scalding passengers. The SS Britannia, thankfully, has stuck with porridge, which, when it slides off your plate, at least doesn't cause third-degree burns. Small mercies. You give up on breakfast after managing maybe 5 bites. Your stomach has made its position clear, and forcing food into it seems like negotiating with terrorists. Around you, others are making the same calculation. The dining saloon empties faster than usual, passengers abandoning the attempt at normalcy and retreating to bunks where at least they can suffer horizontally. The companionway back is even more treacherous than the journey forward. The ship's pitching has intensified, and now there's a rolling component too. A corkscrew motion that seems specifically designed to make humans miserable. You lurch from handhold to handhold, your knuckles white from gripping iron supports. Ahead of you, an older Italian woman loses her grip and slides into the wall with a thump that makes you wince. She's unhurt but clearly shaken, and her husband helps her up with gentle Italian murmurings that need no translation. Back in steerage, the scene has deteriorated. The smell hits you first, vomit, which is apparently the universal response to rough seas regardless of nationality. Several passengers have lost the contents of their stomachs, and while they've tried to use chamber pots or buckets, the ship's motion has made accuracy optional. The Irish mother is tending to all 3 children, all of whom look distinctly green. The Swedish whittler is lying in his bunk with eyes closed and jaw clenched, his face the colour of old paper. You collapse onto your wooden shelf and focus on breathing through your nose. The trick you're learning is to watch something stable, a fixed point that doesn't move with the ship's motion. Except there aren't any fixed points. Everything's moving. The hanging oil lamps swing wildly. Your trunk slides despite your earlier wedging attempt. The blanket won't stay in place. Above deck, you hear a tremendous crash followed by shouting. Something came loose. You have no idea what, but it sounded large and important. More running feet. More orders being barked. The crew is definitely earning their wages today. First time in rough seas, the German man asks from his bunk. He's managed to wedge himself in place with his trunk and a spare blanket rolled lengthwise. That obvious? You're still trying to move normally. Stop fighting it. Become the wave. Historians still argue whether experienced sailors actually suffered less from seasickness or just hid it better, but the advice sounds reasonable even if the execution seems impossible. You try to relax, to let your body move with the ship rather than against it. It helps marginally. Your stomach still feels like it's trying to escape through your throat, but at least you're not using every muscle to fight gravity. The Atlantic has shown its teeth, and day 3 has barely begun. The seasickness hits you around mid-morning, though time has become a meaningless concept in the churning hell of steerage. One moment you're lying in your bunk concentrating on not thinking about your stomach, and the next moment your body has made an executive decision that everything must go. You scramble for the chamber pot beneath your bunk, bless the German man for that particular piece of advice, and proceed to violently expel the 5 bites of porridge you managed at breakfast, plus what feels like several internal organs you probably need. The humiliation is immediate and total. You're crouched over a tin pot in semi-darkness, retching while strangers listen from inches away, separated only by canvas curtains that provide the illusion of privacy rather than the reality. Your eyes water, your throat burns, your abdominal muscles contract with such force that you're genuinely concerned about permanent damage. And when you finally finish, gasping and shaking, you realize this is just the beginning. Your stomach is already preparing for round 2. Around you, the symphony of misery is in full swing. Someone 3 bunks over is vomiting with such violence you can hear it over the engine noise. The Irish baby's crying has taken on a different quality. The desperate wail of a child who feels terrible and doesn't understand why. Multiple passengers are groaning, that deep guttural sound humans make when suffering transcends language. The smell in steerage has evolved beyond unpleasant into something that should probably require government warnings. You breathe through your mouth and immediately regret it, because tasting the air is somehow worse than smelling it. The German man appears at your bunk opening, looking remarkably composed considering the circumstances. "Can you walk?" he asks. "Why would I want to walk?" "Fresh air on deck. Trust me, staying down here makes it worse." This seems impossible. Surely vertical movement combined with ship motion equals death. But your current situation can't get much worse. You nod weakly, and he helps you to your feet. The world tilts alarmingly. Your legs feel like they're made of wet newspaper, but you shuffle forward, gripping his arm with the desperation of a drowning person clutching driftwood. The companionway to the deck is a gauntlet of suffering humanity. Several passengers have given up entirely and are simply sitting on the stairs, heads in hands, accepting their fate. You step over, around, and occasionally on people, muttering apologies that come out as croaks, until you finally emerge into the grey daylight of the deck. The wind hits you like a physical blow. Rain, when did it start raining, slashes horizontally across the deck, cold and needle-sharp. The Atlantic is no longer just rough, it's genuinely terrifying. Waves the size of houses roll toward the ship, lifting the bow until you're staring up at nothing but grey sky, then plunging down into troughs so deep you can't see the horizon. The paddle wheels are churning water and air equally, throwing spray that reaches halfway up the smokestack. This is what the word tempest was invented to describe. Here's your mainstream historical fact to contemplate while clinging to a rain-slicked rail. Seasickness, called mal de mer, affected an estimated 80 to 90% of passengers during their first Atlantic crossing in rough weather. The condition results from conflicting signals between the inner ear and visual system, causing the body to essentially rebel against its own existence. There's no cure, only coping mechanisms, and most 19th century remedies range from useless to actively harmful. But at least you're suffering from a well-documented historical phenomenon. Congratulations! You stagger to the stern rail and grip it with both hands, your knuckles white from pressure. The cold metal bites into your palms. Rain runs down your face, mixing with tears you didn't realize were falling. And standing here, watching the ship's wake, churn and twist in the storm, breathing air that doesn't taste like communal vomit, you feel marginally less like death. Not good, definitely not good, but less actively dying. The German man was right. Other passengers have had the same idea. The stern deck is dotted with green-faced souls clinging to rails, posts, anything bolted down. Most are just standing there, eyes closed, breathing carefully. A few are leaning over the rail in the universal pose of maritime surrender, feeding the fish with whatever remains in their stomachs. Nobody's embarrassed, nobody's judging. You're all too miserable to care about dignity. The Irish father is here, one arm wrapped around a support post, his other hand gripping his wife's arm as she leans dangerously far over the rail. She's retching with the mechanical regularity of a pump. He's murmuring to her in Gaelic. Probably prayers, possibly curses, maybe both. Their children are mercifully absent, presumably suffering below deck under someone else's care. A quirky historical detail that would be funny if you weren't actively dying. Ship's doctors in the 1870s recommended a bewildering array of cures for seasickness, including champagne, brandy, opium tinctures, beef tea, mustard plasters applied to the stomach, and lying perfectly flat on one's back. Some doctors suggested chewing tobacco, others advocated for eating heavily salted crackers. One particularly innovative physician published a paper recommending passengers spin in circles before boarding to pre-adapt their equilibrium. None of these remedies worked because none of them addressed the actual problem, but at least some patients got drunk, which probably counted as improvement. Speaking of the ship's doctor, a harried-looking man with wet mutton chops and a medical bag that's seen better days appears on deck, making rounds like a battlefield surgeon during a particularly unsuccessful campaign. He stops at each suffering passenger, asks perfunctory questions nobody can answer coherently, and dispenses advice from an apparently limited repertoire. Keep your eyes on the horizon, he tells the Welshwoman, who's gripping the rail with such force she might be permanently fused to it. Eat dry crackers, he recommends to a Norwegian man who looks like he might die within the hour. Try to remain calm, he suggests to the Italian woman who's weeping openly while vomiting. He reaches you eventually, his eyes doing that quick professional assessment doctor's perfect. Rough crossing for a first-timer, he observes. Is there any actual treatment, you manage to ask. Time, he says bluntly. Your body will adapt, or the storm will end. Usually the storm ends first. He reaches into his bag and produces a small brown bottle. Peppermint oil. Sniff it. Won't cure anything, but might make you feel slightly less wretched. You take the bottle, what have you got to lose except more dignity, which is already gone, and inhale cautiously. The sharp mint scent cuts through the general awfulness, providing maybe 5 seconds of relief before your stomach reasserts its complaints. Still, 5 seconds of reduced misery is 5 seconds. You'll take what you can get. Historians still argue whether 19th century ship's doctors were undertrained quacks or competent practitioners working with limited tools. But standing here clutching peppermint oil while the ship tries to shake itself apart, you're leaning toward quacks. Though honestly, you're not sure modern medicine would fare much better. Seasickness doesn't care about your medical degree. The doctor moves on to his next patient, leaving you clinging to your rail and your small bottle of marginally helpful oil. The rain continues, the waves continue, the ship pitches and rolls and generally behaves like a mechanical bull designed by sadists. And you stand there, green-faced and shaking, learning the hard lesson that the ocean doesn't negotiate and dignity is a luxury for calm seas. At least you're not alone in your misery. Small comfort, but it's something. By noon, you're guessing, since nobody's ringing bells anymore and time has dissolved into an endless grey present tense, the storm has settled into what you can only describe as vindictive consistency. The waves aren't getting bigger, but they're not getting smaller either. The wind howls through the rigging with a sound somewhere between a scream and a moan, a noise specifically designed to remind humans of their insignificance. And the ship, the mighty SS Britannia with its iron hull and steam engine and Victorian confidence, is being tossed around like a child's toy in a bathtub, operated by a particularly destructive toddler. The normal shipboard routine has completely collapsed. No breakfast announcement, no deck exercise period, no lunch bell. The crew is too busy keeping the ship functional to worry about feeding passengers on schedule, and the passengers are too busy suffering to care much about food anyway. You've managed to keep the peppermint oil down, barely, and are still clinging to the stern rail because going back below deck seems like voluntarily entering hell. When lunch finally makes an appearance, it's delivered by 2 exhausted stewards who look like they've been through combat. One has a fresh bruise on his forehead, probably walked into something when the ship lurched. The other's uniform is soaked through, suggesting he got caught by a wave or fell into something wet. They're carrying a single large basket between them, and their expression suggests this won't be the gourmet experience passengers might hope for. "Cold provisions only," one shouts over the wind. "Galley fires are out. Can't risk them in this sea." Of course the galley fires are out. Hot food requires functioning stoves, which require staying in one place long enough to cook things, which is impossible when the ship's doing its best impression of a mechanical bucking horse. The basket contains ship's biscuit, some hard cheese that looks like it was made during the Napoleonic Wars, and what might generously be called dried meat, but more accurately resembles leather straps. This is lunch. This is what you're paying £18 for. The few passengers capable of eating gather around like desperate gulls, grabbing provisions from the basket with trembling hands. You take biscuit and cheese, figuring they're least likely to make your situation worse. The biscuit is so hard you could probably use it as currency or a weapon, requiring serious jaw effort to even make a dent. The cheese tastes like salt mixed with regret, but it's protein, so you force it down in small pieces while gripping the rail with your other hand. Here's your mainstream historical fact to chew on, along with your leather biscuit. Ships' galleys in the 1870s used coal or wood-fired stoves that had to be extinguished during severe weather to prevent fires, which were even more dangerous than storms. Shipboard fires had killed thousands of passengers in previous decades, so captains routinely ordered galley shut down during rough seas. This meant cold food for everyone, first class included, though first-class passengers at least had provisions that didn't require industrial-grade teeth to consume. Around you, the religious passengers have begun praying, not quietly or privately, loudly and publicly, as if volume might improve their chances of divine intervention. The Italian couple has produced rosary beads and is reciting prayers in rapid Latin, their voices competing with the wind. A Welsh Methodist family is singing hymns, their harmonies surprisingly good despite the circumstances. Someone's praying in what might be Russian, or possibly Polish, the words rhythmic and urgent. The stern deck has transformed into an impromptu outdoor church service, multiple denominations united in their shared recognition that humans can't control this situation, and maybe supernatural assistance is worth attempting. Our Father, who art in heaven, the Irish father begins in English, and several other passengers join in, creating a multilingual cacophony of desperate prayer. You're not particularly religious, but standing here in the howling wind watching waves the size of buildings roll toward the ship, you understand the impulse. When engineering and human competence reach their limits, people reach for something bigger. Can't blame them for that. A quirky historical detail that seems almost too Victorian to be true. Some steamship companies actually encouraged religious services during storms, believing that organised prayer kept passengers calm and occupied. Ships carried non-denominational prayer books and paid bonuses to any clergy travelling on board who would lead services during emergencies. One shipping line's internal memo from 1873 noted that passengers at prayer are passengers not panicking, which is probably the most cynical approach to organised religion you've ever encountered. Still, looking at the praying crowd around you, maybe there's something to it. They look marginally less terrified than the non-praying sufferers. Then you notice something that's actually more concerning than the storm itself. The sailors look worried. Not panicked exactly, but their usual casual competence has been replaced by tense efficiency and frequent glances at the sky, the waves, the ship's behaviour. 3 experienced crewmen are securing cargo on the forward deck, working with rope and chains to lash down anything that might come loose. Their movements are urgent, practiced, and completely lacking in the jokes and banter you've heard during calmer weather. One sailor, the older fellow with the magnificent white beard, passes close to where you're standing and you catch his expression. He's seen storms before, obviously, probably hundreds of them, but this one has his attention. That's not reassuring. When the people who do this for a living look concerned, the amateur passengers probably should be terrified. Is it getting worse? You ask as he passes. He pauses, evaluates you quickly, makes a decision about honesty. Captain's changing course, taking us northwest to avoid the worst of it. Should improve by tonight. He doesn't sound entirely convinced. Should? Weather doesn't read schedules, friend. It does what it wants. Then he's gone, back to securing whatever needs securing before it becomes a projectile. The afternoon continues its miserable march forward. The cold provisions have done exactly nothing to improve anyone's condition. Most passengers who attempted eating have revisited the rail shortly after, contributing their lunch to the Atlantic's ecosystem. The praying has reached fever pitch, with multiple groups now competing for volume supremacy. The hymn singers are up to their 5th song, something about rocks and tempests and hiding places that seems almost too on the nose for current circumstances. You finish your biscuit through sheer stubborn determination and immediately regret it. Your stomach, which had reached a tentative truce with existence, resumes its complaints with renewed vigour. The peppermint oil helps marginally. The cold rain actually helps more, the shock of it providing momentary distraction from internal misery. Historians still argue whether steamships represented genuine progress over sailing vessels in safety terms. Some data suggests steam power actually increased certain risks while reducing others, but standing here being pummeled by North Atlantic weather while the engine churns uselessly against waves that don't care about mechanical advantage, you're starting to question the whole progress narrative. At least sailing ships could run before the wind. The SS Britannia is committed to pushing through. Consequences be damned. Evening approaches. You can tell because the grey daylight is gradually becoming greyer, and the storm shows no signs of mercy. The religious services continue. The sailors work with grim determination. The ship pitches and rolls and generally continues its vendetta against human comfort, and you stand at the rail, cold and wet and sick and exhausted, and realise this is only day 3. 4 more days of this. Impossible. Your body won't survive. Your mind won't survive. But the ocean doesn't care about survival statistics or passenger complaints or prayer services. It just keeps throwing waves at this iron intruder, reminding everyone aboard that humans might have built steamships, but the Atlantic still makes the rules. You wake, if you can call it that, since sleep has been more like brief intervals of unconsciousness punctuated by storm-induced terror, to a sound that takes your brain several seconds to identify. Silence. Not actual silence, obviously. The engine still thumps its eternal rhythm. Passengers still snore and cough and make their various human noises, but the howling wind has stopped. The ship's motion has changed from violent thrashing to gentle rocking. The hull no longer sounds like it's being beaten by giant hammers. The storm impossibly has passed. You sit up too quickly and your head protests with sharp pain. Dehydration, probably, combined with exhaustion and the after effects of 12 hours of violent seasickness. But even through the headache, you feel the difference. The air in steerage, while still terrible, no longer carries that edge of panic. People are stirring from their bunks, testing their bodies, making cautious assessments about whether they've survived. The German man is already up, of course he is, and looking remarkably fresh considering yesterday's ordeal. Storm broke around 3 this morning, he reports, seeing your confusion. Captain's announcement said we're through the worst of it. Lost some time, but we're back on course. I slept through a captain's announcement. You were unconscious, half the passengers were. The body shuts down when it's had enough. He says this matter-of-factly, like it's a normal feature of ocean travel rather than borderline traumatic. Maybe for him it is. Grey morning light filters through the portholes, and it's different from yesterday's apocalyptic gloom. There's actual brightness to it, suggestion of sun behind the clouds. The oil lamps have been turned up, transforming steerage from a dim cave into merely a gloomy basement. Passengers emerge from bunks like creatures crawling from burrows after winter, blinking and cautious, not quite trusting that the nightmare has ended. The Irish children are the first to truly celebrate. The youngest, who spent yesterday crying in abject misery, suddenly has energy again and immediately resumes his primary activity, asking if it's America yet. His siblings join in the chaos, their voices carrying pure relief mixed with the joy only children can muster after trauma. Their mother looks exhausted. She probably never slept, but she's smiling, which is the first smile you've seen from anyone in over 24 hours. The breakfast bell rings, on schedule for the first time since the storm began, and the call to meals actually sounds cheerful. You make your way to the dining saloon, which has been cleaned. The stewards apparently work through the night, scrubbing away the evidence of collective suffering. The tables have been wiped down, the floors mopped, and there's even fresh sawdust spread in areas where particularly unpleasant incidents occurred. It's still the same cramped space with the same bolted-down furniture, but it feels different, survivable. Breakfast is hot, actually hot. The galley fires are back, which means actual cooked porridge instead of ship's biscuit, and there's even tea that's been brewed rather than merely suggested. The food tastes exactly the same as it did 3 days ago, which is to say, institutional and bland. But after yesterday's cold provisions, it might as well be a feast. You eat slowly, cautiously, testing your stomach's willingness to process food again. So far, so good. Here's your mainstream historical fact to accompany your triumphant porridge. Survival rates for Atlantic crossings actually improved dramatically throughout the 19th century, from roughly 15 deaths per 1,000 passengers in the 1840s to 2 or 3 per 1,000 by the 1870s. Better ship construction, steam power, improved navigation, and faster crossings all contributed. You've just survived what used to routinely kill people, and while it felt apocalyptic, statistically, you were probably fine the entire time. Hindsight is wonderful like that. After breakfast, passengers flood onto the deck with the enthusiasm of prisoners granted pardon. The scene above is completely transformed. The Atlantic is still grey and choppy. It's March after all. But the waves are manageable, maybe 6 or 8 feet instead of yesterday's house-sized monsters. The sun breaks through clouds in places, creating moving patches of light on the water. The air smells clean, washed free of the oppressive coal smoke that usually hangs over everything. It's not exactly paradise, but compared to yesterday, it's pretty damn close. And then the laundry appears. You're not sure who starts it, probably one of the more organised mothers, but suddenly the deck is being transformed into an impromptu clothesline exhibition. Passengers have dug out their dampest, most miserable possessions, shirts, trousers, undergarments, blankets, and are stringing them between any 2 stable points they can find. Ropes appear from trunks. Sailors' lines get borrowed without permission. Within an hour, the stern deck looks like a textile factory exploded, with clothing flapping in the wind like flags of surrender. A quirky historical detail that perfectly captures Victorian priorities. Steamship companies actually had regulations about laundry on deck, specifying that intimate garments must not be displayed where first-class passengers might observe them from elevated decks. Third-class passengers were essentially expected to choose between dry clothing and upper-class sensibilities. Based on the current display of undergarments and bloomers flying freely in the wind, the choice has been made decisively in favour of dry clothing. The first-class passengers can avert their scandalized eyes. The Irish children have discovered that the cleared deck space is perfect for running games. Within minutes, they've organized a complex game involving chasing, tagging, and rules that seem to change every 30 seconds. Other children join in, creating a chaotic pack of young humans burning off 3 days of pent-up energy. Parents watch with expressions mixing relief and exhaustion, grateful their children are healthy and active, but already dreading the inevitable crashes when this energy spike ends. The Swedish whittler has resumed his wood carving, his small pile of shavings growing as he works on what has definitely become some kind of bird. He looks pale but determined, his hands steady despite yesterday's ordeal. The Scottish card shark has gathered a new group of players, and is teaching them a new game that definitely involves gambling but with enough deniability that it skirts the official rules. His match pile is already growing. You lean against the rail, same spot, but now it's pleasant rather than desperately necessary, and watch the ship's wake churn white behind the paddle wheels. The rhythm feels almost soothing now. The engine's thump, thump, thump that seemed unbearable yesterday is just background noise today. Your body has adapted, or maybe your expectations have just lowered enough that not actively dying counts as success. The German man appears at your elbow with his characteristic silent approach. Better, yes? So much better. Wait until tomorrow, he grins. You'll be bored again. The body forgets suffering quickly. It's how humans survive. Historians still argue whether traumatic experiences bond people together or simply provide shared reference points for mutual suffering. But looking around the deck at passengers laughing, talking, hanging laundry, and generally resuming life, you're inclined toward the bonding theory. Everyone here survived the storm together. That counts for something. The afternoon stretches ahead, and for the first time since Liverpool, it doesn't feel like a prison sentence. The sun emerges fully from the clouds and actual warmth touches your face. Children shriek with joy. Laundry flaps in the wind. The SS Britannia pushes steadily westward. 3 days down and 4 to go. You're going to make it. Probably. By day 4, you've stopped noticing the engine's constant thrum and the ship's gentle roll. What you can't stop noticing, what becomes increasingly impossible to ignore, is the smell. Not just any smell, but a complex bouquet of human existence compressed into iron walls with inadequate ventilation and virtually no means of proper cleaning. It's been 4 days since anyone had a real bath. 4 days of bodies sweating, clothes worn continuously, chamber pots emptied but never truly clean, damp wool never quite drying, and salt air mixing with coal smoke to create a sticky film on every surface, including human skin. You've entered the phase of the voyage where hygiene becomes less a practice and more a distant memory you're not sure actually happened. The morning washroom queue is a study in lowered expectations. You shuffle forward with maybe 20 other passengers, all waiting your turn at one of 6 tin basins. The fresh water in the barrels, rationed to approximately 1 gallon per person per day for all washing purposes, has already been used by at least a dozen people before you reach it. The water is grey. There are floating bits you're choosing not to identify. The soap, a harsh lye-based brick that the ship provides communally, is slimy from multiple hands and probably contains more germs than it removes. But it's what you've got, so you splash the dubious water on your face, drag wet hands through your hair and call it washed. The German man, somehow, has managed to maintain an appearance of cleanliness. His shirt looks pressed. How? And his beard is neatly combed. You're starting to suspect he might be a wizard. When you ask his secret, he just taps his nose mysteriously and says, "Organisation and low standards." You're not sure which part of that is the actual advice. Here's your mainstream historical fact about maritime hygiene that will make you appreciate modern plumbing. The average steamship in the 1870s had approximately 1 toilet facility per 100 passengers in third class, and these facilities were essentially wooden seats over holes that led directly to the ocean. They were located in small deck houses exposed to weather, offered minimal privacy, and in rough seas became genuinely dangerous to use. Some passengers avoided them entirely, preferring chamber pots in their bunks, to the risk of being swept overboard while answering nature's call. The phrase, "going to the head," nautical term for bathroom, has never been more literal or more unpleasant. You decide to confront the toilet situation, because certain biological needs don't care about your comfort level. The facilities are located in a small wooden structure on the port side, technically accessed from the deck but requiring you to leave the relative shelter of the passenger areas. Inside, and inside is generous since there are gaps in the planking where cold air and occasional spray enter, there are 4 wooden seats arranged in a row, no doors, no dividers, just 4 holes side by side, your most private moments shared with strangers who are equally desperate and equally mortified. The Irish father is already in there, looking straight ahead with the 1,000-yard stare of someone trying to pretend this isn't happening. You take the seat 2 down, nobody takes adjacent seats unless absolutely necessary, and join him in staring at the wall while trying to maintain some mental fiction of privacy. The sound of the ocean rushing below, visible through the holes, is actually kind of mesmerizing if you ignore the context. The Vikings probably had better bathroom facilities. Medieval peasants definitely did. A quirky historical detail that's simultaneously fascinating and horrifying. Some ships' regulations required passengers to use designated chamber pots in their bunks, rather than nighttime trips to the deck, facilities, specifically to prevent passengers from going overboard in the dark. These pots were then emptied each morning in a designated area, creating a daily parade of people carrying their nocturnal contributions to a disposal point. The job of pot monitor, ensuring passengers actually emptied their own pots, was assigned to the unluckiest steward on the crew rotation. Maritime glamour at its finest. Back in steerage, the dampness problem has reached critical levels. Everything feels perpetually moist. Your clothes, which you've been wearing for 4 days straight because you only brought 1 spare set, and you're saving those for arrival in America, have absorbed enough moisture from the air to feel like they've been lightly misted. Your blanket is damp. Your mattress, such as it is damp. The wooden bunk frame is slightly slick to the touch. Even your skin feels clammy, like you're slowly transforming into some kind of maritime creature adapted to permanent wetness. The Irish mother has attempted laundry, washing small clothes in a tin basin with water she somehow acquired. Possibly through negotiation, possibly through theft, you don't ask. She's now discovered that drying anything below deck is essentially impossible. The items hang limply from ropes strung between bunks, dripping onto the floor, creating puddles that add to the general moisture situation. After 6 hours, they're still just as wet as when she started. The laws of physics are not cooperating with Victorian cleanliness standards. In 2 months, this will be funny, she says, noticing your attention on the sad display of undrying laundry. In 2 months, I'll have blocked this entire experience from memory, you counter. She laughs, but there's an edge to it. Everyone's reaching that point where you either laugh or cry, and crying takes too much energy. The Swedish whittler has developed a cough, not the violent, alarming kind that suggests tuberculosis or pneumonia, but a persistent hack that he can't quite shake. Several other passengers have similar coughs. The ship's doctor makes his rounds, listens to lungs with his stethoscope, and prescribes his universal remedy: fresh air and rest. This is medical advice that would be excellent if fresh air didn't require going on deck where it's freezing, and rest wasn't impossible in a space where 150 people are stacked like cordwood. You attempt to brush your teeth, a practice you've maintained through sheer, stubborn determination, using the last of your tooth powder and water from your personal canteen. The German man watches this with amusement. You're fighting a losing battle, friend. At least I'm fighting. Noble. Pointless, but noble. Historians still argue whether the cramped, damp conditions of steerage actually caused the disease outbreaks that killed passengers, or whether passengers were already sick when boarding, and the conditions simply accelerated inevitable deaths. But standing, here in a space that feels like the inside of a wet wool sock, you're pretty confident about which theory is correct. The afternoon brings no improvement. If anything, awareness of the hygiene situation makes it worse. You're now conscious of every smell, every damp surface, every moment of discomfort. The Polish family 3 bunks over has given up on washing entirely. A reasonable choice, honestly. The Norwegian children are developing some kind of rash, possibly from the salt air, possibly from the damp wool, possibly from existing in this environment. Their mother applies what looks like tallow mixed with herbs, which probably helps psychologically if not medically. By evening, you've accepted reality. You're dirty, you're going to stay dirty, and everyone else is equally dirty, so at least it's egalitarian. The Victorian obsession with cleanliness and propriety has crashed against the reality of maritime travel and lost spectacularly. You're all animals now, packed into an iron box, crossing an ocean on the promise that America will somehow be worth this degradation. You climb into your bunk, damp blanket, damp mattress, damp clothes, and try to remember what it felt like to be clean. The memory is surprisingly distant after just 4 days. 3 more days, just 3 more days. By day 5, the routines have solidified into something resembling normalcy, or at least the maritime version of normal, where normal means accepting that you're living in conditions that would horrify land-based humans. But what you've started noticing, now that survival isn't the primary concern, is the human architecture of steerage, the families, the dynamics, the small dramas playing out in the narrow spaces between bunks. This isn't just a collection of individuals crossing an ocean, it's a temporary village, complete with all the complexity that implies. The Irish family to your right has become your inadvertent entertainment. The 3 children, ages 4, 7 and 9 you're guessing, have developed an elaborate game involving buttons, a piece of string, and rules that seem to exist only in their collective imagination. The youngest insists his button can fly, which apparently means he can move it anywhere on the makeshift game board, a blanket spread on the floor, regardless of normal movement rules. His siblings tolerate this with the patience of saints, occasionally correcting him, but mostly letting him cheat because keeping him happy means keeping him quiet. Their mother watches from her bunk while nursing the baby, her eyes tired but soft, probably grateful for 10 minutes where nobody's asking her for something. The father has taken to pacing. Every morning and evening he walks the length of steerage, maybe 30 paces, with his hands clasped behind his back, his lips moving in silent calculation. You've figured out he's practicing English phrases, preparing for the customs inspection that awaits in New York. "My name is Patrick. Byrne," you hear him whisper. "I am travelling with my wife and 4 children. I have employment arranged in Boston. I have £20 sterling." He's memorising his answers like a student before an exam, aware that one wrong answer could mean deportation back to Ireland after all this suffering. Here's your mainstream historical fact about arrival procedures. American immigration officials in the 1870s had broad authority to reject passengers deemed likely to become a public charge, which effectively meant anyone who couldn't prove they had money or employment waiting. The inspection process was notoriously arbitrary, with some officials strictly enforcing rules while others waved people through. Immigrants prepared for these interviews with the intensity of people whose entire futures depended on a 5-minute conversation with a bureaucrat who might be having a bad day. Patrick Byrne's rehearsals aren't paranoia, they're survival strategy. Across the way, a young Polish couple, maybe early 20s, sits on their bunk with a baby who can't be more than 6 months old. The infant is remarkably quiet, almost unnaturally so, and you've noticed the mother's constant vigilance, her hand always on the baby's chest to feel breathing. They speak to each other in urgent whispers, and while you don't understand Polish, you understand worry. The baby is too thin. The mother looks exhausted. The father's face carries that particular expression of a man who's made a huge gamble and is starting to doubt the odds. A quirky historical detail that reveals the desperation of the era. Some immigrant families actually borrowed children from other families to present at customs inspections, because travelling with children suggested stability and reduced the likelihood of deportation. The practice was common enough that immigration officials developed techniques to catch fake families, including asking children questions their parents couldn't answer. Whether any such arrangements exist in this steerage section, you'll never know, but the complicated family groupings you've observed suggest the possibility. The Swedish farm worker has befriended one of the Norwegian families, and despite the language barrier, or maybe because of it, they've developed an elaborate system of communication involving hand gestures, drawings, and the occasional shared word that exists in both tongues. This afternoon, they're teaching their children a game that seems to involve hopping on one foot while tossing a small cloth ball. The children pick it up immediately, turning it into a competition that has them shrieking with laughter and occasionally crashing into adult legs. Nobody minds. The sound of children laughing is probably the most normal thing that's happened all week. You watch a German mother, one of 3 German families travelling together, attempting to maintain educational standards despite being on a ship. She's produced a slate board and chalk, and her 2 children are practicing letters with solemn concentration. "Schreib das Alphabet," she instructs, and they carefully form letters that wobble with the ship's movement. The oldest child, maybe 10, is helping the younger one, guiding small fingers holding chalk. It's such a normal scene, parent teaching children, but rendered strange by the setting. Learning the alphabet while the engine thrums and the ocean rolls beneath iron plates. The Italian couple you've observed throughout the voyage has a different dynamic entirely. They're older, maybe 40s, and travelling without children, which marks them as unusual in steerage where most passengers are young families. The wife spends hours embroidering something elaborate on a piece of cloth, her needle flashing in the dim light, while her husband reads from a small worn Bible. They speak rarely, but sit close, shoulders touching, existing in comfortable silence. You've heard them praying together at night. Quiet Italian murmurings that sound like music, even when you can't understand the words. Then there's the Welsh family with 5 children. 5, ranging from infant to teenager. How they're managing in 2 bunks is a mystery of physics and determination. The mother has mastered the art of nursing the baby, while simultaneously monitoring 4 other children. Cooking, such as it is, managing laundry, and maintaining conversation with neighbouring families. She's essentially running a small business where the product is keeping children alive and relatively quiet on a steamship. The teenage daughter helps, but with the sullen efficiency of someone who didn't choose this responsibility and resents it thoroughly. You recognise that expression from your own siblings, love mixed with obligation, mixed with the desperate wish to be anywhere else. What strikes you most is the father's expressions, not the stressed calculation of Patrick Byrne, but a different look entirely. The weight of responsibility mixed with hope, mixed with fear. These men have uprooted their families, spent money they didn't really have, committed to a journey with no return option, and now they're days away from discovering if it was brilliant or catastrophic. You see it in how they watch their children play, how they calculate remaining provisions, how they practice English phrases or count money or stare at the western horizon like they can will America closer through sheer determination. Historians still argue whether the immigrant experience of the 1870s built character or simply traumatized people into compliance. But watching these families negotiate shared space, limited resources, and uncertain futures with varying degrees of grace, you're seeing resilience that transcends academic debates. These people are writing their own stories, and while you don't know how those stories end, you're witnessing the middle chapters where hope and hardship exist in uncomfortable balance. Evening brings the usual routines. Dinner, bell, mediocre food, return to bunks. But tonight Patrick Byrne's youngest asks a new question. Not, is it America yet? But, what will America look like? And for the first time, Patrick has an answer that's probably true. We'll find out together, son. 2 more days. The families are preparing, hoping, worrying. And you're watching it all unfold in the narrow confines of steerage, this temporary village that will dissolve the moment the ship reaches New York, scattering its inhabitants into American vastness like dandelion seeds on wind. On day 5, something unusual happens. You get invited below. Not to steerage, you're already intimately familiar with that particular circle of maritime hell, but actually below, into the ship's mechanical guts, where the engine lives and breathes and consumes coal with the appetite of a dragon. The invitation comes from a stoker named Jimmy, a slight Irish kid, maybe 19 years old, who you've seen on deck during crew breaks, his face permanently blackened with coal dust that no amount of washing seems to fully remove. He's friends with Patrick Byrne, they're from the same county apparently, and he's offered to show you where the real work happens. You accept because after 5 days of monotony, even a descent into industrial hell sounds like entertainment. The companionway down to the engine room is narrow, steep, and immediately concerning. The temperature rises with each step, the air thickening with heat and the sharp smell of burning coal mixed with machine oil. The engine noise, which you've grown accustomed to as background rumble, grows louder, more immediate, more physical. By the time you reach the bottom, the sound isn't just something you hear, it's something you feel in your chest cavity, your bones, your teeth. This is what deafening actually means. And then you see it, the engine room proper, and it's magnificent in the way disasters are magnificent. The space is maybe 40 feet long and 20 wide, dominated by a massive steam engine that occupies the centre like a mechanical god. Pistons the size of tree trunks drive connecting rods that rotate the paddle wheel shafts. Steam pipes run everywhere, hissing and dripping condensation. Pressure gauges cluster on the walls, their needles dancing in red zones that probably indicate something important. The floor is metal grating, slick with condensation and oil, and through the grates you can see even deeper machinery levels below. It's like standing inside a giant, angry, steam-powered heart. The heat is unbelievable. Easily 100 degrees, maybe more near the boilers. You're sweating within seconds, your shirt soaking through, your lungs protesting the thick coal dust-laden air. And working in this inferno are the stokers. Maybe 8 men visible, all stripped to the waist, all black with coal dust, all moving with mechanical efficiency between the coal bunkers and the boiler furnaces. They're shoveling, constantly shoveling. Each man works a furnace door, throwing coal into the orange mouth with rhythmic precision. Shovel, throw, an endless dance that's been continuing in shifts for 5 days straight and won't stop until New York. Here's your mainstream historical fact about the job nobody wants. Stokers on a steamship in the 1870s typically shoveled between 6 and 10 tons of coal per man per 12-hour shift, working in temperatures exceeding 120 degrees Fahrenheit. The mortality rate for stokers was significantly higher than for any other maritime profession, with deaths from heat exhaustion, accidents, and long-term lung damage being common. They were the lowest paid members of the crew, often recruited from the poorest neighborhoods and considered essentially disposable by shipping companies. You're looking at men literally burning themselves out to power your passage to America. Jimmy appears at your elbow, his teeth startlingly white against his coal-blackened face. He has to shout directly into your ear to be heard over the engine roar. Impressive, yeah? It's insane, you shout back. He grins. Best job on the ship. Good money, nobody bothers you, and you lose weight. The fact that he's making jokes about a job that's probably shortening his lifespan by decades is either admirable or deeply concerning. Probably both. He leads you closer to one of the furnaces, not too close because the radiant heat is enough to singe your eyebrows, and gestures for the stoker to open the door. The man, older than Jimmy, maybe 30, with arms like iron cables, pulls the furnace door open and you're staring into hell. The interior is white hot, flames roaring with a sound like continuous thunder, coal burning so intensely it's almost liquid. The stoker throws another shovelful in with casual precision, and the coal catches instantly, adding to the inferno. He closes the door, wipes his forehead with a rag that's already soaked through, and immediately moves to grab another shovelful from the bunker. A quirky historical detail that sounds made up but absolutely isn't. Some steamship stokers developed a technique called fancy firing, where they would arrange coal pieces in artistic patterns inside the furnace before closing the door, creating brief sculptural displays that burned away within seconds. It was considered a point of pride among the best stokers, their only creative outlet in a job that was otherwise pure brutal repetition. Whether any of the SS Britannia's stokers practiced this art form, you'll never know. But the thought of men creating beauty in furnaces while slowly killing themselves has a poetic tragedy to it. Jimmy shows you the coal bunkers, massive bins lining the walls, filled with Welsh anthracite that gets shoveled out at an alarming rate. "We burn about 4 tons every 24 hours, he shouts. "Started with 80 tons in Liverpool, getting low now, but we'll make it." The bunkers are accessed by narrow passages where men crawl into confined spaces to shovel out coal, working in darkness broken only by a single lantern. It's like being a coal miner, except the mine is moving through the ocean and could explode if the boiler pressure gets too high, living the dream. The chief engineer, a Scottish man with magnificent sideburns and the permanent squint of someone who's spent decades in dim, steam-filled spaces, oversees everything from a small elevated platform. He monitors gauges, shouts orders that somehow carry over the noise, and makes constant adjustments to valves and levers. He spots you, a passenger who shouldn't be here, and his expression suggests he's considering whether to throw you out or just let you experience the horror for educational purposes. He settles for a curt nod and returns to his gauges. You watch the stokers work through an entire cycle. They move like machines themselves, their actions coordinated through long practice. One man shovels coal from the bunker, another carries it to the furnace, a third opens the door at precisely the right moment, a fourth throws the coal in. They rotate positions periodically, sharing the different types of exhaustion equitably. Nobody speaks. Conversation is impossible anyway. but they communicate through gestures and glances that suggest they've been working together long enough to function as a single organism. Historians still argue whether steam-powered ships represented genuine technical progress or simply transferred human suffering from one maritime profession to another. Sailors on sailing ships faced different dangers, but possibly less sustained physical destruction. But watching these men literally feed themselves into the mechanical maw to power your comfortable passage, the moral calculus feels pretty clear. Progress, maybe. Justice, definitely not. After 20 minutes, you've had enough. The heat is unbearable, the noise is giving you a headache, and your lungs feel coated with coal dust. You gesture to Jimmy that you're leaving, and he escorts you back to the companionway, grinning at your obvious distress. "Still want to be a stoker?" he shouts. "How are you alive?" you shout back. "Good question. Ask me in 10 years. His laugh suggests he doesn't expect to be alive in 10 years, at least not in any functional sense. You climb back towards steerage, each step bringing slightly cooler air and slightly less noise. By the time you reach passenger territory, the engine's roar has returned to its familiar background thrum. But now you can't unhear it. Can't stop thinking about the men below, shoveling coal into furnaces, keeping the mechanical heart beating, destroying themselves so you can cross an ocean in relative comfort. The Irish children are playing on the floor. Patrick Byrne is practicing his English phrases. The German man is reading. Everything's normal. But below the wooden deck, the stokers are still shoveling, still feeding the fire, still burning. Sunday morning arrives, day 6 of the crossing, and with it comes a transformation you weren't expecting. The usual breakfast chaos is subdued, passengers moving with unusual deliberation, speaking in lowered voices. The Irish mother has produced clean-ish clothes from somewhere deep in her trunk, dressing her children in garments that look almost respectable despite 5 days of maritime wear. Other families are doing the same, the German mothers combing children's hair with water, men buttoning vests they've kept in reserve, women pinning up hair, with more care than usual. It takes you a moment to remember, it's Sunday, and apparently even on a steamship in the middle of the Atlantic, Sundays matter. The announcement comes during breakfast, delivered by a steward who's also made an effort with his appearance. His uniform actually looks pressed. Divine services at 10 bells, main deck, all passengers welcome, attendance encouraged. That last phrase, encouraged, has the particular emphasis that means the captain expects you there, which effectively makes it mandatory without technically being mandatory. Victorian social management at its finest. By 10 o'clock, the main deck has been transformed into an impromptu cathedral. The crew has arranged cargo crates and barrels into makeshift pews, creating rows that face a small raised platform near the main mast. A table draped with what looks like a repurposed sail serves as an altar, topped with a large leather-bound Bible and a brass cross that's probably borrowed from the captain's cabin. Passengers file onto deck in their Sunday best, which ranges from genuinely nice clothes among the artisan families to least dirty available option among the poorest immigrants, and settle onto the improvised seating with surprising reverence. Captain Morrison appears in full uniform, dark blue coat with gold epaulettes polished to mirror brightness, brass buttons gleaming, white gloves that probably haven't been worn since the last Sunday service. He's accompanied by the first mate, who carries a hymnal that looks ancient enough to have survived the Great Flood. The assembled passengers, maybe 200 souls from both steerage and second class, though first class remains conspicuously absent in their own elevated section, stand as the captain takes his position at the altar. Even the children sense the solemnity, falling into rare silence. Here's your mainstream historical fact about maritime religion. Sunday services aboard ships were considered essential for maintaining order and morale, with captains given legal authority to conduct religious ceremonies including marriages and burials at sea. The Board of Trade actually required British ships to carry approved prayer books and hymn collections, and captains who neglected Sunday services could face disciplinary action. Religion wasn't just spiritual comfort, it was operational policy, a tool for maintaining social control in an environment where traditional authority structures were fragile at best. "Let us pray," Morrison begins, his voice carrying that automatic authority that captains perfect. The assembled crowd bows heads, some genuinely devout, others just following social protocol, and Morrison launches into a prayer that's clearly been written specifically for maritime circumstances. "Almighty God, who commands the winds and the waves, we beseech thee to grant us safe passage across this mighty ocean. Protect this vessel and all who sail upon her. Calm the seas that threaten us and guide us safely to our destination. It continues for several minutes, hitting all the expected themes: gratitude for surviving the storm, requests for continued fair weather, pleas for protection against the ocean's dangers. The religious language is standard Victorian Anglican, but the underlying message is pure superstition dressed in theological clothing. Please don't let the ocean kill us. We promise we're being good. The passengers respond with murmured amens that sound more like incantations than prayers. The first mate distributes hymnals, not enough for everyone, so people share, 3 or 4 passengers crowding around single books. The chosen hymn is Eternal Father, Strong to Save, which you recognize as basically the official maritime prayer set to music. Eternal Father, strong to save, whose arm hath bound the restless wave. 200 voices rise in ragged harmony, accents from a dozen countries transforming the English lyrics into something simultaneously beautiful and chaotic. The Irish families sing with particular enthusiasm, their voices carrying melodies that sound more Celtic than Anglican. The German families stick to the written music with characteristic precision. The result is glorious disaster, which somehow makes it more genuine than perfect harmony would have been. A quirky historical detail that reveals the depth of maritime superstition. Many sailors in the 1870s believed that Sunday services were literally magical protection against disasters, and that ships which skipped services were actively courting misfortune. Some crews refused to sail with captains known to neglect religious observances, considering it tantamount to suicide. There are documented cases of sailors mutinying when captains announced plans to work through Sunday without services. Whether this was genuine religious conviction or elaborate superstition probably varied by individual, but the practical effect was the same. Sunday services happened, or else. Morrison delivers a sermon that's mercifully brief and surprisingly practical. No fire and brimstone, no theological complexity, just straightforward advice about patience, endurance, and maintaining faith during hardship. We are tested not by the destination, but by the journey, he intones, which sounds profound until you remember he's being paid regardless of how passengers feel about the journey. Those who endure shall receive their reward. The reward being not drowning and arriving in America, which honestly seems like a pretty low bar for divine blessing, but nobody's arguing. Then comes the unexpected part. The superstitious observances that aren't technically part of Anglican services, but have been grafted onto maritime religion through centuries of tradition. A sailor appears carrying a bucket of seawater, and Morrison makes a gesture that's almost like a blessing over it. We commit this vessel to the ocean's mercy, he says, and suddenly everyone's standing, forming a line to dip fingers in the bucket and touch the water to their foreheads. It's half baptism, half pagan offering, and absolutely nobody questions it, because at sea, every possible form of protection gets deployed. Patrick Burns' children approach the bucket with wide eyes, clearly unsure what's happening but understanding it's important. The youngest dips his entire hand in, soaking his sleeve, and his mother doesn't even scold him. The German families participate with their usual precision, each member taking their turn with measured solemnity. The Italian couple crosses themselves before and after touching the water, layering Catholic ritual onto maritime superstition, onto Anglican service in a stack of spiritual insurance policies. You join the line because at this point, why not? When your turn comes, you touch the cold seawater and press wet fingers to your forehead, feeling faintly ridiculous and simultaneously comforted. The ocean has been your prison, your tormentor, and your transportation for 6 days. If touching its water in a bucket somehow helps, you'll take it. Historians still argue whether maritime religious practices represented genuine faith or simply psychological coping mechanisms for dealing with uncontrollable dangers. But standing here on deck with 200 other people, participating in rituals that blur the line between Christianity and ocean worship, you're pretty sure the distinction doesn't matter. Faith, superstition, hope, fear. They're all different names for the same thing. Humans trying to exert control over forces that don't care about human preferences. The service concludes with another hymn, Abide With Me, which is either beautifully appropriate or depressingly fatalistic depending on your mood, and a final blessing from Morrison. May the Lord watch over us until we reach safe harbour. Go in peace. The crowd disperses slowly, reluctant to let go of whatever comfort or community the service provided. Children resume being children, running and shouting. Adults return to their normal concerns about provisions and arrival logistics and whether America will actually be worth all this suffering. But for an hour, everyone pretended the ocean might listen to prayers. That has to count for something. One more day, just one more day until America. By Sunday afternoon, something has shifted in the collective consciousness of steerage. Maybe it's the service, maybe it's the simple math of 6 days down and 1 to go. But suddenly everyone's talking about America like it's a real place they'll actually reach, rather than a theoretical concept that exists beyond endless ocean. The Irish children have abandoned their games and are pressed against the rail, staring westward with expressions of intense concentration, as if they might spot New York through sheer force of will. Their father stands behind them, one hand on each child's shoulder, and you notice his lips moving, still practicing those English phrases, the rehearsal becoming more urgent as the deadline approaches. The German man has produced a small notebook and is making lists. You catch glimpses over his shoulder, addresses in Cincinnati, names of contacts, prices he's been told to expect for various goods and services. He's treating America like a mathematical problem to be solved through adequate preparation, which is very on brand for him. When he notices your attention, he taps the notebook meaningfully. Information is survival, he says. The prepared immigrant succeeds. The unprepared one becomes a cautionary tale. Cheerful, you observe. Realistic, he counters. You have a plan? You realize you don't, not really. You have a vague idea of heading west, finding work, making a new life. The same plan as probably half the people in steerage, which is to say not much of a plan at all. But admitting this seems like inviting judgment, so you mumble something about keeping options open and change the subject. Here's your mainstream historical fact about immigrant arrival. Approximately 30% of European immigrants to America in the 1870s eventually returned to their home countries, unable to find work, disillusioned by American realities, or simply homesick. The success stories dominated the letters sent back to Europe. Nobody wanted to admit failure, creating a feedback loop of optimistic misinformation that drew more immigrants who face the same harsh realities. You're surrounded by people whose dreams are based partially on lies told by those who came before them. Whether they'll become the success stories or the silent failures remains to be seen. The Swedish whittler has finished his carving. It's definitely a bird, specifically an eagle, which seems almost too symbolically obvious for American arrival. He shows it around proudly, and several passengers admire it with genuine enthusiasm. The Polish couple asks through elaborate pantomime if he'll make one for their baby. For remembering the journey, the mother manages in broken English. He nods, already reaching for a fresh piece of wood. The idea of wanting to remember this voyage seems insane to you, but then again, maybe when you're old and comfortable, the suffering becomes a badge of honor rather than a trauma. Memory is funny like that. By evening, the card games have been abandoned in favour of language practice. The Scottish kid who was running poker operations has reinvented himself as an English tutor, teaching useful American phrases to a circle of eager students who hang on his every word. You're not convinced his accent is helping. Scottish accented English might be technically English, but you're pretty sure immigration officials will struggle with it. But the students don't know enough to question his authority. How much does that cost, he enunciates slowly. Where can I find work? I have my papers. The phrases are practical and depressing in equal measure. Quirky historical. Detail that sounds made up but appears in multiple immigrant memoirs. Many passengers spent their final night aboard ship sewing American money, bills and coins they'd acquired before departure, into hidden pockets in their clothing, terrified of robbery in New York. Some women created elaborate false hems in their skirts. Men built fake boot heels with hollow compartments. The paranoia wasn't entirely unfounded. Immigrant exploitation in New York was a thriving industry. But the elaborate precautions also created situations where people literally couldn't access their own money quickly when needed. Security through excessive complexity. The Norwegian children are teaching each other English words they've picked up from the crew and other passengers. Their pronunciation is creative. New York comes out as something like New Yerk, and America has about 5 extra syllables. But they're trying, which is more than some adults can manage. Language acquisition through childhood fearlessness, absorbing new sounds like sponges. You feel a pang of envy. Your own English is decent but accented, and you're old enough to be self-conscious about mistakes. These kids will be speaking perfect American English within 6 months, while you'll probably carry your accent to the grave. Patrick Byrne has gathered his family for a planning session, all 5 of them squeezed onto 2 bunks in close consultation. You overhear fragments. When the inspectors ask about Papa, and, if they separate us, find Uncle Michael at the address. They're strategizing like generals before battle, which isn't far from accurate. The customs inspection is basically combat by bureaucracy, and families that don't coordinate their stories sometimes get split up. Children detained, parents allowed through, or vice versa. The Byrnes aren't taking chances. Throughout steerage, similar conversations multiply. The Italian couple is reviewing documents, smoothing wrinkled papers that have survived 6 days in damp conditions. A German family is redistributing luggage, apparently trying to make their possessions look more prosperous, or possibly less prosperous. You're not sure which creates better immigration outcomes. Everyone's calculating angles, managing appearances, preparing their best performances for the American audience. Someone starts a rumor that land will be visible by dawn, and it spreads through steerage like wildfire. You have no idea if it's true. Ocean distances are mysterious, and you've learned not to trust shipboard gossip, but suddenly everyone's discussing wake-up schedules and optimal positions for viewing the approach. The youngest Irish child, upon hearing land tomorrow, immediately asks if that means they can get off the ship tonight. His father's explanation of how time and distance work goes completely unheard. The kid has decided America is coming tomorrow, and that's that. Dinner that night has a different energy. The same mediocre food, the same tin plates, the same cramped benches. But people are eating faster, talking louder, laughing more easily. The Welsh family starts singing. Not a hymn this time, but a folk song about leaving home and finding fortune. Other families join in with their own songs in their own languages, creating a cacophony that's somehow not unpleasant. It's celebration mixed with anxiety, mixed with relief, mixed with fear. The full spectrum of human emotion compressed into a maritime dining saloon. Historians still argue whether the immigrant experience created stronger communities through shared hardship or simply traumatized people into seeking familiar faces in strange lands. But watching these families bond over terrible food and worse accommodations on their final night at sea, you're witnessing something genuine. These people will scatter across America, New York, Boston, Pittsburgh, Cincinnati, Chicago, places you can barely imagine. But for tonight, they're a village, temporary, accidental, but real. You return to your bunk and lie awake, listening to the engine's familiar thump, thump, thump for the last time. Tomorrow brings customs inspections, probably chaos, certainly uncertainty, but also land, solid ground, the end of this floating prison. The Irish youngest is still asking questions. Will America have grass? Can I run in America? Will it smell better than the ship? The answer to all 3 is almost certainly yes, one more night, just one more night. You wake to shouting, not alarm shouting, nobody's drowning or on fire, but excitement shouting, the kind that carries pure adrenaline and disbelief. You scramble from your bunk, your body protesting after 6 nights on a wooden shelf, and join the stampede of passengers heading for the companionway. The sun isn't fully up yet, dawn light just beginning to grey the portholes, but already half of steerage is awake and rushing topside. Someone's yelling land, land in about 6 different languages simultaneously. The deck is chaos. Passengers crowd every available rail space, pointing, shouting, some crying openly. And there, on the western horizon, impossibly small but undeniably real, a dark line that isn't ocean, land. Actual, solid, blessed land. You can't see details yet, it's too far, the light's too dim, but it's there. America. The theoretical concept has materialized into geographic reality, and the emotional response is overwhelming even for people who pride themselves on stoicism. The Irish youngest is screaming "America, America" at volume that probably violates noise ordinances, while his siblings jump up and down like they're trying to launch themselves off the deck through sheer enthusiasm. Patrick Byrne has his arm around his wife, both of them staring at that distant line with expressions that mix relief, terror, hope, and exhaustion in equal measure. 6 days of crossing, preceded by who knows how many months or years of planning and saving and agonizing, and now it's real. The gamble is about to pay off or devastate them, and there's no backing out now. Around you, passengers are celebrating in their various cultural styles. The German families shake hands formally, as if closing a business transaction. The Italian couple embraces with passionate intensity, the husband lifting his wife off her feet and spinning her while she laughs and cries simultaneously. The Norwegian children are singing something that's probably a traditional folk song about homecoming, which is ironic since they're arriving at a place that's definitely not home but might become home eventually if luck and hard work align. Here's your mainstream historical fact to contemplate while watching grown adults weep at the sight of distant shoreline. The psychological impact of immigration was so intense that doctors in the 1870s recognized something called arrival shock, a combination of overwhelming relief, paralyzing fear about the future, and disorientation from transitioning between worlds. Some immigrants literally collapsed upon reaching shore, their bodies finally releasing tension they'd been holding for weeks or months. The phrase kissing the ground wasn't metaphorical. People actually did it, driven by emotions they couldn't articulate in any language. But celebration time is brief. Within an hour, stewards are moving through steerage with new urgency, distributing instructions and warnings about the arrival process. Prepare your documents. Have your money counted and ready. Practice your English answers. Inspectors will board before you disembark. The mood shifts from pure celebration to anxious preparation. This isn't the finish line, it's the final exam, and failure means deportation. You return to your bunk and pull out your papers, the collection of documents that supposedly prove you're worthy of entering America. Passport, vaccination certificate, letter from a supposed employer, which you paid someone in Liverpool to write and which may or may not be entirely truthful. Character reference from a vicar who'd never met you before the day he signed the letter. The papers look official, which you're hoping counts for more than actual accuracy. You rehearse your story. Name, age, occupation, destination, amount of money currently possessed. The lies and half-truths feel bigger now that the moment of testing approaches. Around you, similar preparations multiply. The Polish couple is organising documents with shaking hands, their baby asleep in a cloth sling, apparently unaware that its entire future hangs on the next few hours. The Swedish whittler is counting money repeatedly, his lips moving as he converts currencies in his head. The German man has his notebook open and is reviewing his list one final time, occasionally making small annotations. Everyone's performing their own version of pre-test cramming, a quirky historical detail that perfectly captures immigration absurdity. Some steamship companies sold preparation services to third-class passengers, offering to coach them on correct answers to inspection questions for a fee. These services range from legitimate advice to outright scams where passengers paid for information that was either useless or actively harmful. One notorious immigration consultant in Liverpool told Polish families to claim they were German because inspectors preferred German immigrants, advice that resulted in multiple deportations when the families couldn't answer follow-up questions in German. Caveat emptor, 19th century style. Then the goodbyes begin, and they're more emotional than you anticipated. The Swedish whittler presents his eagle carving to the Polish couple's baby with solemn ceremony, his eyes wet. Patrick Byrne shakes hands with the Norwegian father, both men gripping hard enough that knuckles turn white, no words necessary. The German man finds you and offers his hand. Good luck, friend. May America treat you well. Same to you, you manage, surprised by the lump in your throat. You've shared a wall with this man for 7 days, exchanged maybe 50 sentences total, and now he's disappearing into American vastness and you'll never see him again. It's absurd how much that matters. The Irish poet, remember her, the one who recited that declaration poem to dark-haired young man, is having a tearful farewell with her sisters. Apparently she's heading to New York with her new sweetheart while her sisters are continuing to Boston with their family. 7 days ago they were strangers to this romance. Now they're saying goodbye as it reshapes their sister's entire life trajectory. Maritime courtships move fast because they have to. Throughout steerage, similar scenes multiply. Addresses are exchanged, though everyone knows the chances of maintaining contact are minimal. Promises are made. Write when you're settled. Visit if you're ever in Chicago. Tell the family we made it. Most of these promises will never be kept, not from malice, but from the simple, overwhelming chaos of immigrant life. But saying them matters. The promises create the fiction of continued connection, softening the reality that this temporary village is about to dissolve completely. Historians still argue whether shipboard friendships were genuine bonds or simply survival mechanisms that passengers discarded upon reaching shore, but you're pretty sure it's both simultaneously. The German man isn't your friend, you don't even know his first name, but you've survived something together, and that creates connection whether you want it or not. By mid-morning, the shoreline has resolved into actual features: buildings, docks, church spires. The approach is agonizingly slow, the ship reduced to minimal speed as it navigates harbour traffic. Tugboats appear, small vessels that look like toys compared to the SS Britannia, but which are apparently necessary to guide you to dock. Sailors are active everywhere, preparing ropes and anchors and performing the mysterious tasks that transform a moving vessel into a stationary one. You can smell land, actually smell it. The scent of city, wood smoke, horses, garbage, life, mixing with salt air and replacing the ship's familiar coal and human odour. It's simultaneously appealing and overwhelming. That's real earth over there, solid ground that doesn't move, and soon you'll be standing on it. The Irish youngest has gone quiet, overwhelmed. America looked better from a distance. The SS Britannia doesn't so much arrive at New York as it slowly surrenders to it. Tugboats nudge the iron hull toward the dock with surprising gentleness. Sailors shout coordinates and measurements. Ropes as thick as your arm get thrown to dock workers who secure them to massive bollards. The engine, your constant companion for 7 days, finally, blessedly stops. The silence is so sudden and complete that several passengers gasp, as if they'd forgotten what quiet sounds like. Your bones still vibrate from muscle memory, but the actual mechanical thunder has ceased. You've arrived. But arrival doesn't mean freedom. Not yet. Passengers are ordered to remain below deck while officials board for inspections. You retreat to steerage one final time, and the space looks even more miserable now that escape is tantalizingly close. The damp bunks, the stained floors, the smell that 7 days of humanity has created, it all feels like archaeological evidence of suffering. You're already trying to forget. Your trunk sits where you've kept it wedged for a week, and suddenly packing seems impossibly urgent. You need to be ready, need to move fast when permission comes. The officials arrive in uniform, dark suits, serious expressions, clipboards that represent bureaucratic power over your entire future. They set up a processing station in the dining saloon, that same space where you ate mediocre porridge and salt pork, transforming it into an impromptu customs office, a table, 2 chairs, a line forming immediately, stretching back through steerage, passengers clutching their precious documents with white-knuckled intensity. The inspections are brutally efficient. Each family or individual gets maybe 3 minutes. Name, origin, destination, occupation, money, health check. The inspector examines papers with practiced skepticism, asks follow-up questions designed to catch lies, make snap judgments about worthiness. You watch Patrick Byrne's family go through, the children wide-eyed and silent, their father delivering his rehearsed answers with only slight trembling in his voice. The inspector stamps their papers. They pass. The relief on Patrick's face could illuminate the entire ship. Here's your mainstream historical fact about the reality of arrival. Approximately 2% of immigrants were rejected at entry points in the 1870s, sent back to their countries of origin at their own expense. Reasons for rejection included contagious diseases, criminal records, suspected prostitution, being deemed likely to become a public charge, or simply failing to satisfy an inspector who was having a bad day. After surviving the ocean crossing, some immigrants ended up right back on a ship, their dreams destroyed by a 3-minute interview. The system was arbitrary, cruel, and entirely legal. Your turn comes. You approach the table, papers trembling slightly in your hand, and meet the inspector's eyes. American eyes. The first genuinely American thing you've encountered. He's maybe 40, with the expression of someone who's processed 10,000 immigrants and has heard every lie, every excuse, every desperate story. Name, you give it. Occupation, you deliver the lie you've practiced. He doesn't blink. How much money do you possess? You state the amount, carefully calculated to be enough to seem solvent but not enough to seem suspicious. He nods, makes a notation. Any family in America? Another lie, this one referencing the fake letter in your papers. He glances at it briefly, stamps your passport, and suddenly you're approved. Just like that. 7 days of ocean crossing, months of planning, your entire future decided in 90 seconds by a man who'll forget you before lunch. Next, you move toward the exit in a daze, clutching your stamped papers like they're made of gold. Other passengers are clearing inspections or not. You see a German family being pulled aside for additional questioning, their faces showing panic. The Italian couple passes through smoothly. The Polish family with the too-thin baby gets waved through with barely a glance. The arbitrary nature of it all is staggering. Finally, the order comes. Third-class passengers may disembark. The stampede is immediate. You grab your trunk, join the surge toward the gangplank, and suddenly you're on it. That narrow wooden bridge between ship and shore, between ocean and land, between who you were and who you're becoming. The gangplank flexes under the weight of dozens of desperate humans, and for one terrifying moment you think it might collapse, dumping everyone into the narrow gap between hull and dock. But it holds, and then your feet hit the dock, solid, non-moving, blessed ground. The sensation is so overwhelming you actually stumble, your body still expecting the deck to roll beneath you, but it doesn't. It's still, perfectly, impossibly still. Around you, passengers are reacting similarly, some laughing, some crying, the Irish youngest running in circles and shouting, "It doesn't move! America doesn't move!" The dock is chaos. Customs officials directing traffic, con artists immediately descending on confused immigrants offering helpful services at inflated prices, family members searching for arriving relatives, carts hauling luggage, vendors selling food that actually smells appealing after 7 days of ship rations. It's loud, dirty, overwhelming, and absolutely beautiful because it's land. Solid, stable, American land. You stand there with your trunk at your feet, watching the SS Britannia empty its human cargo, watching your temporary village dissolve into individual stories heading in different directions. The German man disappears into the crowd, his precise walk recognizable even from behind. Patrick Byrne's family is met by relatives. The reunion involves much crying and Irish being shouted joyfully. The Swedish whittler shoulders his pack and walks toward the city without looking back. Historians still argue whether the immigrant experience built American character or simply traumatized people into resilience. But standing here on New York soil after 7 days of maritime hell, you're just grateful to have survived. The future is uncertain, probably difficult, maybe impossible. But at least it won't involve salt pork and a wooden shelf. America stretches ahead. Vast, strange, frightening, promising. And you're here. Actually here. The journey is over. The real work begins. But for now, just for this moment, you stand on the dock and breathe American air. Your body is exhausted. Your clothes smell like 7 days of maritime confinement. Your back aches from the wooden bunk, and you probably look like exactly what you are, a desperate immigrant with nothing but hope and stubbornness. The SS Britannia sits behind you, already preparing for its return voyage to Liverpool, ready to carry another load of dreamers across the Atlantic. The engine room, stokers will shovel more coal, the steerage bunks will fill with new bodies. The cycle continues, indifferent to individual stories. You think about the people you shared that space with. The German man's precise preparation, Patrick Byrne's practiced English, the Irish poet's declaration of love, the Swedish whittler's patient carving, the Polish couple's quiet desperation. All those stories, now scattering across a continent like seeds on wind. Some will take root and flourish, others will wither. Most will simply endure, finding whatever survival looks like in this new world. The dock noises gradually fade as you stand there, letting exhaustion wash over you in gentle waves. Your trunk can wait. The city can wait. America can wait. For just a few more breaths, you exist in the space between voyage and arrival, neither here nor there, suspended in the satisfaction of having crossed an ocean and survived. The sun is setting now, painting the harbour in colours that the Atlantic never showed you, oranges and purples and golds that speak of land, of seasons, of earth beneath your feet. Somewhere in the distance church bells ring, marking the hour, reminding you that time moves differently on shore. No more measuring days by meal bells and engine rhythms. Real time, with all its complications and possibilities. Your eyes grow heavy, your breathing slows. The New York dock, with all its chaos and noise, begins to feel distant, dreamlike. You've made it. Against odds, across ocean, Through storm and sickness and crushing boredom, you've made it. And now, finally, you can rest.